What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and in this one we are going to be doing a review of every single episode of the Skull Island anime from season 1. That's right, this one goes out to all of you guys who didn't want to watch the episode-to-episode reviews. Now they're all put together as one, so you don't have to go video to video. I hope you enjoy. What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be reviewing episode 1 of Netflix's Skull Island. Episode 1 titled Maritime Pilot. Oh, what can I say, friends? I love being proven wrong. I really enjoyed this episode. This episode did everything right in my opinion. It, first of all, blew me away by going slow. It was slow paced. We took the whole first episode to even wind up on Skull Island. I really thought we were going to get to Skull Island within the first 7 minutes of the show. I thought it'd be a rapid fire through basically what happened in this first episode to get us to Skull Island as quick as possible. They didn't do that. They actually showed a lot of restraint in this episode, and the writing, I thought, was really good. I was really impressed with it. I thought that this was a very well written show. To run through some of my notes here, and they're kind of all over the place, so just bear with them. I thought this episode had a fantastic hook with Annie's escape. I thought the animation was great, although I didn't really buy her pulling all that off with the handcuffs on, but whatever. She's an Iwi. I'll give her an advantage. I think she's an Iwi anyways. She's definitely from Skull Island, so she's got some skills. Again, as I said in my trailer reviews and breakdowns, the settings and the environments are really where this show shines. They are fantastic. The ship looks great. Both ships we see in this episode look great. The interior sets look great. The fire on the boat looked really good. I loved when it set things on fire. I also love how they have some setup for things that are going to come later in the show, like we see the helicopter here, and now it won't feel out of place when it shows up a few episodes later. Small details, these are kind of all over the place, that I really loved in this show are things like how the belt ripped when she was doing her little zip line, which is a little unrealistic for the MonsterVerse, but I liked that the belt ripped, which added back in that layer of realism that made me feel like this can fit with the MonsterVerse. And of course, that is kind of my metric for this show, is does this feel like something that can fit within the MonsterVerse? And they do a lot of zigging and zagging in this first episode, and I would say overall they balance it really well. How do you tell an animated story in a live action universe? Well, I thought they did a really good job balancing those elements in this episode. Later on, we see a guy get smacked up against some glass, and when he does, he breathes and some fog gets on the glass, and I thought that's a great touch. Really good to show the moisture hitting the glass. I also loved the scary face in the clouds at the start of this episode with the lightning going on. It was very King Kong 2005, and then later on, Charlie's rolling around the room while having a conversation in his chair, and I thought it was a really relatable human moment that they added. I also noticed that they might have something that vaguely resembles the Kong Skull Island poster in the Once Upon a Maritime ship, which I thought was another really cool little Easter egg, if that is what that was supposed to be. Charlie has that little line about going skydiving, and so I think at some point in the show he's gonna have to do a big skydive, because that just felt like setup in my opinion, which it would be fun if it does happen where he has to do a big jump. That'd be a lot of fun. I love the small personal conflict between the characters here. It is something that I think is very important in monster movies, and really just in any movie. It's something I think is lacking in most kaiju movies, which is where I feel there's a disconnect for audiences, where the characters don't have something small, relatable, and personal to deal with. And I like that here. I loved the college conflict. I thought it really set the characters up well, and I loved the way that they're kind of like this low budget version of Monarch looking for monsters. I thought that was a lot of fun. I also really liked Hiro and Mike. I thought they had a great dynamic, and I'm really sad about what happens later in the episode, but I'll talk about that in a second. I thought the dialogue in this episode was super witty and engaging. I actually really liked it. I'm sure the humor is going to turn a lot of people off, especially people going into this show looking for something to hate. I think they are going to really dislike the humor in this show, but I personally found the dialogue to be very witty and engaging and well written. I also like how fun and silly this show is without compromising the tone of the MonsterVerse. It never felt more absurd than Kong Skull Island to me, which is the metric for a King Kong sequel. Some of the jokes in here really landed for me as well. Like some of them I thought were really funny, such as the way that Mike translates Hiro, even though Hiro spoke English. I thought that was a great joke. And I thought Boomer was a really great side character, even though he had very little screen time and probably died in this episode. There were some good King Kong-esque moments in here too, like finding Annie overboard, much like how they find Dwan in the 1976 movie. I also liked the dog setup. Had we not known what dog was, had we not seen him in the trailers, I think the mystery would have been built really well here. One thing I don't hope we do is I don't hope we see a love triangle between Annie, Charlie, and Mike. I think that's going to be a little cringe, and I think it's a little too predictable. I hope they don't go that direction with it, but I have a feeling they're going to. I really liked the coffee joke early in the episode. It made Hero an instantly likable character and made what happened to him all the more tragic. One thing I noticed was that Annie speaks English really well for someone who is probably an Iwi. I have a feeling that she might have been somewhat stranded on Skull Island for a long time, and so she's just kind of adapted to the island, but if she is an Iwi, she speaks English really well. But I do like that she said the sky was on fire when she saw the flare, because of course the Iwi wouldn't know what flares are, and it also reminded me of the way that they talked about people from Skull Island, the Birth of Kong. Remember when they kept calling them the people who fell from the sky? I thought that kind of tied things together in a way that supported continuity rather than going against it. Now, this is going to sound like an insult, but I really don't mean it to be. I just noticed it. It's just something I noticed. I don't mean it to be rude. The music and voice cast in this episode, I thought all of it was good. I actually really liked the soundtrack. Sometimes I didn't love it, but sometimes I really loved it. And I thought the voice cast was all very good. I really liked the voice cast. However, they all feel like they're part of an animated project. The voice cast feels like an animated voice cast, and the soundtrack feels like a soundtrack for an animated project rather than a movie. I don't mean that in a rude way. It just stuck out to me as being a stylistic thing where it didn't feel like they were going for consistency with a live action project. Felt more like they're going, okay, let's play full into that this is an animated project. I don't know. Good Kong inversion here with the bad guys coming onto the ship to take away the native girl. That's a good twist on the way that the natives usually come to steal the normal girl. I also like that she freaks out when she finds out they're bombing the ocean to wake up monsters. I'm sure all of the Iwi on Skull Island don't appreciate blowing things up to wake up monsters, not after 1973. I also like the line where he goes, well, it sounds dumb when you say it like that, because that line was very Kong Skull Island, reminded me of the whole skull crawler reveal. I liked it a lot. Again, for me, the humor's really working in this show. It worked for me in the trailer. It's working for me here. I'm sure that's going to not be a popular opinion. I'm having fun with it. This episode builds tension really well. I thought it had a great escalation with the human threat leading into the kaiju threat. I also loved the way that the other ship goes missing, creating this great mystery. Good Clifford reference that made me laugh a lot. I thought that was a lot of fun, and it confirms that Clifford is a kaiju. It's definitive now. It's interesting how Cap says he got close to discovering a monster decades ago. I'm curious to know if that's going to be a Godzilla cameo if we do a flashback or something, or if it'll maybe be flashing back to Bill Randa and that incident that set Bill Randa on the path he went on, kind of leading them both to Skull Island. I don't know how old Cap is supposed to be. He seems a little too young for that to be the case, but it could be interesting. I also wonder if it'll somehow, some way tie into the Monarch television show that will be coming out soon, which will deal with all sorts of monster encounters in the past. Mike's freak out when he finds out that the guy has a knife is great. It is very in line with what we see from him in the trailers, so I like that it seems he has a very consistent character. I also like that Boomer, the deaf guy, can't feel vibrations. I know that's a weird thing to like, but it is something that has stuck out to me for a long time, that deaf characters are always given kind of a superpower rather than just being treated like people. And it was something that was really prominent in film school where nobody knew how to write deaf people. Sometimes they wanted to, and every time somebody tried to write a deaf person in film school, they gave them basically superhuman abilities to sense vibrations, and I always felt that's kind of an unrealistic and unfair depiction of deaf culture. And so I liked in this show that they didn't really do that. I mean, Gia in Godzilla vs. Kong has done pretty well, but even there, she kind of occasionally will be able to sense something that maybe she shouldn't have. The heartbeat was great, but Godzilla was a little like, what? Anyways, I really loved the War of the Gargantuas-esque reveal of the big squid. I liked the way it grabbed that guy and pulled him out of the cabin. That was a good touch. And I do think that these might have been intentional War of the Gargantuas references. I also was right in my trailer breakdowns that red squid is also the blue squid, so that's cool to know. The cinematography in this episode was great. I really liked it. I liked the top-down shot a lot. I really liked that top-down chase. And I also, this is another touch that I really appreciate, is how they place things in the foreground. I feel like one of the biggest things that is a big tell for me when they're in the volume in live action movies or on green screens or in animated projects, it's a big thing where it's like, okay, this is an animated project. They don't place things in the foreground often. They mostly don't. And I really like it when things go out of their way to create interesting shot compositions even when they don't have to. And this is a case where they created interesting shot compositions when it would be harder for them to do so than to just have people standing in front of backgrounds. So I like that they did that a lot. I hope we learn what what they were actually chasing, because they said they're not chasing the Squid Titan, so I hope we learn what they were actually chasing. I'm sure we will. And I cannot believe Hiro got squashed. That was really sad, but it was a good sacrifice moment. I like the way he pushes his son out of the way, saves his life, and they gave that moment a lot of time to breathe. They actually gave it time to breathe and had an emotional payoff with it at the end of the episode. It didn't just happen and move on with no consequences. You felt the weight of that death. It also established this as being more than just a kids show, a show that will deal with bigger themes. I really liked it. I'm shocked he's dead, given the fact that in the trailer we hear a voice that sounds suspiciously like him say, "Have you seen my son?" So I'm thinking maybe he won't be dead, but there was a lot of blood and he got really smushed, so I don't know. Seems like he's dead. The Squid Titan is crazy with its reflexes, the way it catches that spear, but not as crazy as how sharp that spear must be to cut through handcuffs. I really like that the squid could harness electricity too. That's something that definitely King Kong should learn how to do in the MonsterVerse, because come on, I'm never going to give up on it. Lightning hands are awesome. And the Lovecraftian squid reveal was fantastic, but damn, Cap can hold his breath for a really long time. Annie's rescue was also really well done. The way she rescued Cap was really well done and actually reminded me of The Little Mermaid. It was cool. It was great. It's a miracle that they all wound up on Skull Island. I don't know how they didn't drown. I don't know how they didn't get lost at sea, but that's where I will put my suspension of disbelief that they all wound up on that island somehow. And then I really like the final reveal here where they're in the footprint. It's a very Godzilla 98-esque reveal, and it's also a fantastic setup for the future episodes. And overall, I really enjoyed this show. I thought it was a really well done episode. I was very impressed with it. I'm very happy to be wrong about my feelings about it, and I'm super excited to see what comes next. Today we're going to be reviewing Skull Island Season 1, Episode 2, The Last Blank Spot on the Map. Let's keep it up, guys. We're on a roll here, 2 good episodes in a row. I'm excited to see the next one. Starting out, I just want to say, good title. The Last Blank Spot on the Map. That gave me instant Kong 05 vibes, and there's a reason for it. Carl Denham refers to Skull Island as the last blank spot on the map in the 2005 King Kong movie. Now, it's possible Carl Denham also refers to it as that in the 1933 film. I couldn't find a clip of him saying that in the 30s film. And I also know Bill Randy uses very similar terminology to refer to Skull Island without saying those exact words in Kong Skull Island. So it's just a good title. And it was a good episode. It was a very restrained episode. Again, another slow pace, slow burn, which is exactly what I wanted out of this show. And overall, I've been very impressed with the way this show has been handling its pacing and story structure. I loved the intro of this episode. I loved the Kong Skull Island styled shots. I loved the reveal of the GI and who he is. I've always wondered about the soldiers who flew in on the helicopters at the end of Kong Skull Island, those who rescued our survivors. And I've also always wondered what was it like going back home with the people who were on the island being like, we do not want to talk about being there. But at the same time, they're definitely going to talk at least a little bit. Certainly the soldiers are. And those guys in the helicopters have no reason to keep quiet about what they witnessed. So I liked the reveal that this guy was one of the random soldiers who we never met in Kong Skull Island, one of the people on the boat who never went to the island himself and had to hear these horror stories from his friends. I also think it's interesting that orders came from the government themselves to burn up and classify all information about Skull Island. I'm surprised Monarch had that kind of influence. But that was a great way to tie this into the 2017 film and really made this truthfully feel like a sequel. I also noticed in the last episode that they did in fact have the Skull Island map. They clear it off a table at one point, so I figured Hiro was actually looking for Skull Island. I guess I just didn't bring that up in my last review, but they do have the map in the last episode. This was another restrained episode just like the first one, and it really took its time. I liked that it didn't just throw us right into the island, that it gave us this little flashback, and it had good city sequences too. The city looked great, as all the environments in this show do. I didn't think we'd actually get to see any of the mainland in this show, so I thought it was cool that we got to flash back to that. I also want to shout out the fact that this show has some Japanese leads, which I think is cool in a Godzilla originated franchise. Obviously, the MonsterVerse started with Godzilla, not King Kong. That's what I mean. The MonsterVerse started with Godzilla, so I think it's cool. So Hiro and Mike seem to be looking for a girl, and I'm not quite sure who they're talking to, but if I had to guess, it would be Mike's mom, because there's no mention of her yet, and they're missing somebody who both of them seem to want to go after. She was exploring, looking for something, so I'm gonna think we're probably gonna see whoever they're looking for in the final episode of this show. I didn't expect this show to carry over so much damage, like physical damage. Mike's chest shows visible wounds at the start of this episode, and I wonder if he has some sort of venom in him that might lead to the eye bags we see in the trailer. He might get sick over the course of the show and maybe even die in the finale. I don't think he'll die because he's pretty young and that'd be pretty ballsy of Netflix, but who knows? I like how they take the time to show emotion and debrief in this episode as well. I also love how they've got boys just being boys. I love the boys just hanging out, being fun together. I also love that they console each other and let one another have vulnerable emotions in front of each other. I think that's a very important thing for media to have positive depictions of, positive male relationships, and I don't think the media does a very good job of that. So I really like when you get to see coming of age stories show positive male relationships that don't have to have any other implications other than pure friendship. I think it's really important to show, and it sets a good example for young boys watching. So shout out to the writers of this show for doing that. I love that stuff. The Tremors plotline in this episode was a lot of fun. It's funny that I mentioned Tremors in my trailer breakdown, and then we actually wound up getting a whole plotline based on it. The beach sequence was really great. I thought the crabs were lots of fun. I really liked their designs, and I think they're really fun monsters. I like the way that they have those little sand pits that they create. I like the way that they kind of have, they call them trapdoors. I think it's really neat the way that this show definitely is a continuation of the mythos of Skull Island. Clearly, the Legendary Mythology team is much more integrated with these shows than I thought they would be, which is a good thing. That's a very good thing. Again, I love being proven wrong here. And I really appreciate it because the monsters in this episode function like actual animals, the way that all of the monsters in Kong Skull Island were designed to. That's a great touch. I mean, poor Mike, man, also. First he gets electric striked, and now he gets his leg pinched real dang bad, to the point where he's bleeding later in the episode, and I like that they showed the damage of that. One note that I had was that I'm really sure these boys would get sunburned super bad on that rock, and I don't think the show will pay attention to that, but that's okay. It was just an observation I made. I love how the title card at the start of every episode changes to reflect the threat of that episode, and so this one was the crab pincer. All of Cab's scenes were great. The environments were so beautiful. Again, I could compliment every environment this show takes us to. I won't, so I'll just say all of the scenes with Cap look amazing. One thing I did notice was Cap notices he's super high up, like really high up, and then he just kind of slides right down where he noticed he's like on a massive cliff a couple seconds later. I don't know if the animators didn't remember that he's on a big cliff, but somehow he notices he's on a huge cliff, doesn't want to fall off, and then he slides down it a second later anyway. It's weird. The footprints in this episode were really impressive. I noticed that a lot of the time you were with Cap, there was actual footprints in the sand, not just with him, but with the other characters he was next to. That's a very impressive little detail. The crystal bug is perfect. Not only does this fit exactly with the type of creatures we saw on Kong Skull Island that blend more natural elements like plants or rocks with animals, but I also love that it functions like a real animal with this very beautiful inside that's trying to lure prey in, and it almost works. It was super cool. I also loved how it didn't just outright attack the guy. It stood there and looked at Cap for a minute and only killed somebody once provoked, which goes back to the themes of Kong Skull Island. Remember that scene when they're about to shoot the buffalo and then they don't? I like that stuff. I like how the animals can sometimes just be animals. It also led to a good action sequence that had a pretty quick and painful death, much like in the movie Kong Skull Island. Then there was little things, like even the birds in the sky were weirdly colored, which I appreciated, and then they had a joke that was like, "You stink." "You're stinky." Uh-oh. Which reminded me of Shin Godzilla, where they also repeat that joke in Shin Kamen Rider. I don't know if that was a Shin Godzilla reference, but if it was, that's fun. Smart characters as well. I like that. They're testing out the vibrations in the ground, although I will say the crabs are not nearly as threatening as they should be, because later they're walking on the ground and the crabs do not track those vibrations very well. They also can just freely talk on the ground. They don't have to whisper, unlike Tremors, and the crabs don't seem to notice them. So crabs, you suck at sensing vibrations. I really liked the scene of the boys chatting on the rock. I wish we got to hear a bit more of the conversation they were referencing, but I thought the humor in that scene landed very well. Again, I thought this whole episode was very funny. I think the humor is really working for me. I'm very curious to hear what other people have to say about it. The little rock critter was also great. He's lots of fun, and it was super cute to see him jumping around. I think he would make a great pet. Again, the humor really landed with Irene and Cap as well. I thought all their scenes had a nice level of comedy to them. I like the way that Cap and Irene were both kind of sussing each other out and on each other's case the whole episode, and it led to that incredible scene where they discovered the aloe turtle. That's what they kept calling it, I think. That was amazing. That was such a Kong Skull Island sequence. The turtle that was part plant, part animal. Great stuff. Oh my god. I actually tweeted recently about how I was worried this show would kind of abandon the flora fauna thing that Kong Skull Island was doing. I'm glad to see that they didn't. They truthfully are continuing the mythology of that movie. Awesome stuff. I think the reason they were calling that turtle an aloe turtle, by the way, is because they were referring to aloe the plant, like what aloe vera comes from, the stuff you rub on yourself when you get sunburned. Maybe the boys need to visit that turtle after they get off the rock and the beach. Also, they seem to tease the mother longlegs in this episode. The boys are referencing how they're glad that they're fighting crabs and not giant spiders, so I wonder if we will see the mother longlegs or other giant spiders again. I also like how they talk about how Hiro would want to pet the crabs. It's very Serizawa of him. Annie's okay in this episode. I wish they downplayed her her by about 10%. I wish she was played a little more straight, because the whole thing with the spears and the way she wanted to fight the crabs felt a little weird to me. It felt a little too on the nose. I think if she had delivered those lines a little more serious and a little less joking and cocky, it would have been a little more believable for me, and I would have been a bit more on board. But she did come across at times in this episode as a little too much. I also love the girl chatter after she leaves, where the boys are talking about girls, and I love how Charlie accepts his defeat in that scene. It was strange how sometimes the crabs were impenetrable, but sometimes they could be stabbed. That was one thing I noticed, but I really liked the way that whole scene resolved, with Kong's roar terrifying the entire island, sending all the wildlife running because they all know what that means. It was such a wonderful King Kong 2005 moment, and truthfully establishes Kong as the king of this island. The reveal that Annie isn't from this island and she is from a neighboring island was really well developed. I like the slow reveal of that, and it makes me wonder if she's from an island that we know of. Like maybe she'll be from Infant Island if they're wanting to bring in a bit more of the Godzilla element to this show. Or she could be from one of those little tiny islands off the bottom shores of Skull Island. Maybe they count those as different islands. I wouldn't. She could be from a brand new island entirely though. I like how Cap is brave enough to just call Irene out immediately about how he knows she's lying, and she just kind of accepts her fate because she knows he's smarter than her. He caught her, and I thought that was a good reveal. I don't think he's going to want to give the girl over to them. I think he's going to be like, let's go get my son, and then he's going to try and double cross them and save the girl, save Annie. I also love how Mike calls out the soldiers on their BS about how they're on a monster island, yet they're still looking for a girl rather than focusing on the true priority. Again, going right back to those themes from Kong Skull Island about how man versus man is still prominent even in the face of disaster and giant monsters. I'm guessing that the soldiers want something on her island. They need her to find something on her island. That's my guess, that they're trying to exploit some sort of resource that she is aware of. I also think it's fun that they call Skull Island a monster island in this episode. Maybe Annie's home, maybe whatever island she comes from could become the Monsterverse Monster Island now that Skull Island has been pretty much destroyed last time we saw it in Godzilla vs. Kong. And I think there's going to be some trouble, in the next episode now that that walkie-talkie's destroyed. That's not good. Doug's reveal at the end of this episode was great. Lots of fun. It was just like, wow, we just ended it, huh? That was how the episode ends? She's flying through the air and then the episode ends? Weird. Weird place to end the episode, but it was a fun reveal, and it's setting up for what I'm assuming is going to be a very exciting action sequence towards the start of the next episode. Today we're going to be doing my review for Skull Island Season 1, Episode 3, What's Up, Croc? Well guys, I think we are at an impasse here. I think this is going to be the point where you're either going to get on board with this show or it's going to lose you, because I even felt like this episode was a little strange, which makes me think that if I'm saying that and I liked the first two, people might fall off with this episode. I've only posted 2 reviews so far. I am doing these in the moment. I'm trying my best to keep up on these, and I'm trying not to look at the online reaction to the show yet, just because first of all I don't want it to sway my opinion, and also I don't want spoilers. I'm still watching the show. I've only seen 3 episodes. But I will say I have not seen anything nice. I've seen no positive comments on my videos. I have not really checked, to be fair, so there might be some, but it seems like people are disappointed. The one comment that stuck out to me was someone saying, I just finished the show and I'm here to say that the way you feel about Godzilla Awakening is how I feel about this show. I don't know what could possibly happen in the next couple episodes to make somebody say that. I really dislike Godzilla Awakening as part of the Monsterverse canon. I think it's a fine story on its own, but to hear that makes me nervous for what comes up next. That's also the reason that I don't really read stuff, because I don't want to feel nervous. I want to go into it excited. But I would say, this episode I'm starting to feel a bit of a tug of war going on with this show. I feel like I'm having something different than the fan base is probably having. I don't know what to think of this episode. This episode is simultaneously not terribly eventful, and at the same time, I find it to be way too fast-paced. I felt like certain beats happened way too quickly in this episode to have any sense of tension or danger or any mood or atmosphere or anything. They just kind of occurred. But at the same time, I know that if you were to slow this show down, you'd lose way more viewers because people don't want to sit and watch it slowed down. I know that. I know. So that's kind of the conflict I had with this episode, was I felt like it wasn't eventful enough like the other 2 episodes have been, but I also felt like the things that happened in this episode tended to happen a little too quickly. That being said, said, let's get into it because I still enjoyed this episode a pretty decent amount. I thought it had a great hook. Again, that's what this show does best. It has great hooks at the start of the episode. This was probably my favorite hook at the start of the episode. I really like the Dragonfly Easter egg to the Kong Skull Island 2017 movie. I like that the monster conflict that happens is enough to break up the human drama that's occurring, but I do like that the humans are still fighting each other even when running away from the monsters. So as we learn here, Annie is from another island, not Skull Island, where her dog apparently killed 7 men. So I guess he is a murderer of men. I really didn't think he'd kill people in this show, but hey, he didn't kill them on screen, so my theory still stands that in order to make him likable, he might not kill anybody on screen. I loved the little gag where the guy's standing in the water and he's like, don't come in, and they're like, but there's a monster over here, we don't want to get eaten, and he goes, I don't want to get eaten, and then he gets eaten. Thought that was a great bit. He also got the worst death in the show so far. Guy got snatched into pieces by that crocodile. I saw limbs flying everywhere and blood going everywhere. Again, I like that this show is playing a bit more for a teenage to young adult viewer base. I appreciate that it's not skewing towards children's shows, which is something Netflix specializes in, taking an adult franchise and turning it into a kid's cartoon. It's a weird thing they do. So I like that they're not doing that here. I like the whole don't move when the crocodile's coming up. It's a good Jurassic Park reference, and I like how it just doesn't work because that's not how science works. But this crocodile guy, again, I'm just not sold on him standing on 2 legs. I thought he was fantastic when he was running around on all 4s, but when he stands on 2 legs, he is distractingly like the Ben 10 Season 4 villain / turned hero crocodile guy. He's too similar. It's weird. The chase is very exciting. It's lots of fun. I was a big fan of this sequence. I thought the whole thing moved and flowed really well. I also like that we've got a river. Skull Island should have lots of rivers. Good to see that terrain being brought back in from the 2017 movie. Overall, I thought Skull Island in this episode was presented pretty well in line with that 2017 movie. I'm glad that there was a story reason for why the crocodile didn't jump in the water, because I was very curious about that. It could definitely swim way faster than they can. It could have grabbed them much sooner. And I love the way that they fall off the waterfall and then celebrate, thinking that they've survived and that they've gotten away, only to in the background see the crocodile dive off the cliff. I thought that was a great visual gag, and it was one of the funniest parts of the episode. This crocodile also reminds me a little bit of the crocodiles from the 2005 film, although I think he's a little cooler than they ever were. But they met the same fate anyways, just to a different mouth. Kong's reveal is awesome here. I loved the music. I thought it was really great, and I loved the reveal of him. I thought it was a really cool way to reveal him, although I would say I'm not sure why they refer to him again as a 100-foot tall monkey. If we're gonna be consistent with the Monsterverse, he should be at least 200 plus by now. I get that the kid is just guesstimating, but guesstimate 200 foot. Just say 200 foot, and then we'll be like, because time has passed. Again, as I mentioned in my trailer breakdown, it's nice to see that Kong's always munching. That guy is always so hungry. He eats all the time. He's eating all the time, so I like that he's snacking here. And they also call him a big monkey once again, which completes the tradition of always calling him a monkey in all of the movies. I like the mustache guy. I think he's a fun character, but some of his dialogue is a little too on the nose for me and was distracting at times. The more I hear about this group, the more I think that they could be hired by Apex. I don't really think that's where this show is leading. I think they're just going to be from some random government organization, but if they wanted to tie things together to the broader version of the Monsterverse that we're aware of, having him be from Apex would be quite interesting. Now, a big plot twist would be if they're from Monarch and they're the bad guys of this show. That'd be a huge plot twist reveal that I would be kind of into. But for now, I'm going to say they're from a brand new group that's kind of Apex adjacent. Not in canon, but like they've got similar motives, right? Irene believes that gun bit a little bit too fast. That was one of the jokes in this episode that didn't really land as well for me. I mean, Cap has a great reason for just agreeing with her. It's a very natural reason, and I like that it's addressed in this show, but I didn't like that they had to do that weird little gun bit in the first place. Also, they mention a fountain. I don't know what they're referring to. Is it supposed to be like the Fountain of Youth? Is that what they're looking for in this show? Is that maybe what's going to be inside that temple that we've seen in the trailers? I have no idea. It's interesting that Skull Island is not the only island like this. I wonder what protects the other ones. Are they also surrounded by storms? Are they in the same storm hub? I'm not sure. They also say it's a 100-mile radius, which feels huge to me. Maybe that's not as big as I'm thinking it is, but that feels like a huge radius. I wouldn't think that Skull Island and its inhabiting area would be a 100-mile radius. It seems a little bit too big. Like somebody else would have found it by now. The sea monster joke where they're like, sea monster, that one really works for me. That's one of the funniest bits they do in this show. And I also thought that teenage girl joke was really funny. I loved Irene's reaction into it. And I also get why Cap would be willing to go with them. He's totally willing to help them because they're humans, you know, he gets it. They're humans, they can rationalize with him, and he also believes Dog is a super violent monster who just killed a man. So he probably would want to go with them. But I have a feeling when it comes down to it in a couple episodes, I don't think he's going to side with the humans. I think his kid is going to be like, oh my God, Dad, you're with the bad guys. And he'll be like, no, it's a big misunderstanding. And then I think he's going to side with his kid. That's how I think it'll go. The boys getting into an argument by the river, it was a little strange for me because they didn't get into that argument earlier when Mike revealed that he knew about Skull Island and he was being blamed for things he just couldn't have known about, like the mercenaries. But I did like the argument they were having itself. I didn't like the context of it, but I liked the dialogue being spoken. I liked the arguments each one presented. I thought it was a well-written argument that just came at the wrong moment. And I thought it was a good explanation when they say Skull Island doesn't show up on radar because of the magnetism. I thought that was a good explanation for it. I don't know if that's how radar works, but I thought it was a good explanation regardless. I like knowing that it doesn't show up on radar, and even his explanation of the electromagnetic frequencies was still iffy enough to be like, oh, it could be any other reason as well. So I'm confused a little bit about what the reasons they came here is. Is it because Mike and the gang wanted one last adventure with Charlie, or is it because Mike and Hero were looking for a woman? Maybe the woman thing is a big secret that he still has yet to reveal. That could be the case. Maybe that woman was looking for this fountain of some kind. I'm not sure. But it was interesting that he gave a different reason in this episode than he did in the last episode. I like the little fourth wall break where they ask if they're boring or not. It felt very fun because I'm sure it was poking fun to the fact that they were expecting critics to critique the fact that we're spending time with the human drama rather than the monsters. I love the hills and the mountains on this Skull Island. I think it does a really good job representing the Skull Island from the 2017 movie. However, the red grass field still does feel a little bit out of place for me. We never saw anything quite like that in that movie. We did see other biomes. We even saw some red grass patchy areas in Kong Skull Island. We just didn't see anything to this extent. However, it was worth it because I really enjoyed the giant red field cat. He's great. So perfectly taken from the mythos of Kong Skull Island, this perfect blend between flora and fauna that has this natural camouflage with its environment. It was so perfect from that movie, but it was just amplified a bit further and made a bit sillier for this animated style. I thought it really worked. The Phoenix attack, on the other hand, did not work for me. It just felt out of nowhere. It felt rushed. They could have really built tension with that and had a really exciting sequence had they slowed that sequence down by like a minute or two and had a great minute of suspense at the start where they started to realize what was going on. Because as it stands, that sequence just kind of comes and goes in the span of like 1 minute entirely. I also noticed shortly after this sequence, Irene has the greatest vocal performance in the show. That voice actress does a great job. I forget her name, but I have seen her in live action movies as well, and she's a great actress. So I do think she delivers a great vocal performance in this show. That little interview scene was really cute. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I loved the sunset aesthetic, and I thought it was a very sweet bonding moment, but maybe I'm 17? That feels a little sus. I'm sure that's gonna be her canonical age when they find out how old she is, but like, she could be 23 right now, rizzing up a 17-year-old kid. I don't know. Feels weird to play around with that specific time period of ages. The chopper takedown also felt pretty rushed. I didn't feel like it had enough time or tension to build. It just kind of happened. That being said, I liked the way it happened. I thought the sound design was great. I thought the squid destroying the chopper was a fun reference to Kong Skull Island when he blew up all the helicopters. I just felt that moment again was a little too rushed for me. I found it interesting as well that these guys are collecting samples of all sorts of materials rather than like storing eggs in their chug jugs. I don't quite know what else they're doing in there, but yeah, they're just throwing whatever they can in there. But yeah, certified chug jug moment. Also, now that I think of it, is Dog the dog from the mug root beer mug? He could be. Okay, how are they going to get tranquilizers on the island? I didn't really understand Irene's plan at the end of this episode at all. It made zero sense to me. How do they plan to get tranquilizers to the island? How do they plan to attack the squid in the first place? How are they going to get them there with the squid blowing up a helicopter in front of them? Or are they going to fly it in on an airplane and drop it? I didn't totally understand that. If they can fly an airplane over, why can't you fly an airplane over and find a place to land it on the island? I don't know. It felt very awkward. That whole sequence felt awkward to me. I didn't understand her plan. It made zero sense to me, but I appreciated that even Cap realized that plan made zero sense. She's kind of got a bit of a Packard thing going on where it's almost like, you know, how Packard turned Kong into this symbol for the war. It's almost like Irene has turned Annie into this symbol for whatever she's after, and so she's kind of blinded by that. So she might undergo a similar character arc. Kong walking away at the end of the episode was great. I liked how huge he looked, and it also reminded me quite a lot of Godzilla Earth, also from Netflix's anime. And then lastly, I'll just say I was right about Mike. The poor guy is not doing well. The rash seems to be spreading. It has caused the eye bags like I thought it would. I don't know what it could be. It could be internal bleeding or poisoning or something, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think that Annie's going to know some sort of cure for it and that he'll be okay in the end, but he just straight up could die from it. I'm not sure. We're going to be reviewing Skull Island Season 1, Episode 4, Breakfast Fit for a Kong. I had a good time with this episode. I think, honestly, my biggest critique of this episode is the clickbait title, Breakfast Fit for a Kong. The dude has 1 second in the episode, and all we see is his hand. Really gonna put him in the title of this one and then not use him, huh? I'm not typically one to complain about not putting your monster in your movie. Godzilla having limited screen time in the Godzilla movie, Kong having limited screen time in the Kong movie, works for me. This one just stuck out as particularly egregious because none of the other titles have Kong in them, so you'd think he'd be in this one a bit more. Yeah, I don't know why Charlie is so shocked to learn that dog can climb trees. Dude's got big claws. That seems like an obvious thing. I also don't know why Mike throws such a big fit. I don't remember how many times has Annie abandoned them so far. Annie abandons them right after the shipwreck. I don't really know if I would consider that abandoning them. She abandons them so that she can attack the guy. She finds them in the jungle with the crocodile, and then they go into the woods. She's still right by their side. She didn't actually abandon them. They just thought she did. I don't really think she abandons them that often. I think that they're just dramatic. Specifically Mike. I think Mike's just a drama queen. Like maybe once, arguably. I guess he would argue maybe twice. I don't know. I like the big bird at the start of this episode. I like how they just stand there ready to fight it, and I honestly think they could have taken it. I like that guy because he reminds me of King Kong 2005. He's a lot of fun. Annie's not the greatest friend for tricking them into being bait, but that's fine because, again, I always had faith in her. I thought she was going to be right by their side the whole time. I'm surprised they didn't realize that. I dislike Dog sitting like a man during this little conversation they have, and I'm also very curious about the brick texture behind Annie. It's very strange. Feels like they should have addressed that there's seemingly a human structure on the island that they just don't seem to care about. And yeah, I just thought Dog sitting like that kind of broke my immersion of the show. A little bit of testing my suspension of disbelief a little too far. Annie's backstory is quite interesting. I'm surprised they didn't really ask how old she was when she got stranded on that other island and how old she was when her dad died. Maybe she wouldn't know, but I feel like she's just a person from civilization who got stranded, which seems to be where they're leading with this. Obviously, she speaks English. You'd think that they would ask her, like, how old were you? And she would have some semblance of knowledge as to how old she was when she got stranded. But I do like the backstory. I also love the vine snakes. They're great. Very Kong Skull Island. Again, going back to that flora fauna thing that I love so much. I've seen some people in the comments be like, what are you even freaking talking about flora fauna? That just means plant animal. Yeah, guys, I didn't invent the term. Houston Brooks in Kong Skull Island did. Remember the audio logs that came out with the movie where he says, Darwin had it easy. This isn't flora or fauna. This is flora fauna. Maybe I just know my Monsterverse lore. Catch up. I'm on it. Speaking of those Skull Island vine snakes, I'm pretty sure those attack some soldiers in the Kong Skull Island novelization. Again, showing that the Legendary Mythology team is actually more on it than I ever gave them credit for, which is fantastic. Legendary, hire me. I really want to be on your mythology team. That'd be like a dream. Hire me, Legendary. I'm now accepting jobs. I'm out of college. Give me a job. Please give me a job. One thing I did notice is that Skull Island isn't called Skull Island because it looks like a skull. Yes, I mean, it does look like a skull from above. They are right about that. But Bill Randa tells us that this place has been called Skull Island for long before satellites got pictures of it from up in the air. Long before that ever happened, this place was a legend called Skull Island. I don't know why it originally was called Skull Island. Maybe because it's got a giant mountain with a skull on it. That very well could be. But I did appreciate that this was a natural way to get some more foreshadowing that they are also planning on leaving by air. It seems our two groups are starting to align with each other without even realizing it. Our gang also now wants the radios that the other gang has. So both groups are headed to each other on a collision course that I'm excited to see play out in the next episode. Charlie falling into the ant pit was a fun way to pay off Marlowe's warnings from Kong Skull Island. I've been waiting this whole show for giant ants to show up. I think it's fantastic that they do, but I loved that we got to see them. I wish they chirped like birds like they did in the Kong Skull Island movie though. Maybe those are different ants, because he says those ones are up in the trees and you gotta watch out for them. That's one of my favorite jokes in the movie. I don't understand the soldiers' plans still. I feel like they don't even understand their plans still. And then they did have that weird line about that there's a tracker in the handcuff, and it's just incredible technology. It was very strange exposition, and it felt like it's setting up for something very heavily. So maybe this really is a proto-Apex. Maybe they really are working for Apex or something, some mercenary group associated, because they've got some sort of incredible technology. It felt a little strange. In that flashback, Cap definitely sees Godzilla, right? Like, absolutely. He sees a dragon that glows blue in the ocean. That's very much Godzilla. It reminds me actually a lot of the King of the Monsters promos. This is unrelated, but I like that we get the aspect ratios in the flashback to make it more cinematic. I saw somebody comment on one of my previous videos. For that dude who commented on my previous videos, while I'm not really reading comments or responding to comments at the moment because I don't want spoilers, I'll get to them eventually, but to the dude whose comment did slip through that I did see it, yes, the aspect ratio changing is something that everybody has. It's not just your TV. But yeah, that guy definitely sees Godzilla. I had heard some rumors that there was a Godzilla cameo in the show before the show came out. I'm thinking that this probably was the Godzilla cameo. If there was ever supposed to be screen time of Godzilla, it must have been cut. I'm thinking this was the Godzilla cameo. I think this is it. I think it was just an Easter egg to Godzilla, kind of the way that it's very strongly implied in Kong Skull Island that the thing that took down Bill Randa's ship, the USS Loudon, was Godzilla. I mean, straight up in production, they were gonna show photos of Godzilla during that scene, and Jordan Vogt Roberts asked them to cut it because he wanted it to be more of a King Kong movie, not a Godzilla movie, which is definitively the right call to make. Same reason I think we don't see Godzilla on screen here. I think they want to keep the conversation on Kong and not Godzilla. Good call. The carnivorous plants are a lot of fun. Reminds me of the movie Mothra. Also, Ultraman deals with carnivorous plants in one of the early episodes, so it reminds me a lot of that. I also loved learning that Irene is a botanist and a scientist who loves this freaking island. Makes me think that she might be from Monarch or Apex, but maybe Monarch. Dog also kind of sucks. I don't really like Dog still. He hasn't really grown on me. Annie being indifferent to her friend being trapped in an ant pit also is like kind of lame. She is not the best of friends for sure. Mike was right about that, but Mike, he's a real one. He is a homie. I love that he just goes down there with no plan to get them out. I appreciate that eventually Annie does join them, and it shows that she truly does like these guys and care for them, and I get it. She's socially awkward. She's been on an island her whole life. I don't think the audience should be judging her that hard. I actually don't judge the character that much. I think in her position, it's very natural for her to be the way she is. I think she's very well written in that regard. I'm not 100% sure what this whole detail with the sword was supposed to show, other than that people have been on this island for a long time. I mean, maybe that's just because they want this to stand on its own. So for people who don't really know the Skull Island mythos, this catches them up to date that people have been on this island for a long time and stranded here for a long time and been dying here for a long time. But for the rest of us, it really didn't accomplish much except eating up some screen time. The humor with the adult characters in this episode landed a lot better than the humor with the teenagers in this episode. I thought that this episode actually enjoyed the screen time with the adults more than with the kids. I loved how much weight and emphasis Cap put on the loss of that plant as a loss of life. It felt very Serizawa to me. It reminded me a lot of Serizawa's line in King of the Monsters, "I admire all forms of life." Then we go back to the teenagers where we get one of the weirdest Kong cameos possible. There's just a cameo where the Kong music starts playing. They say the big monkey's back. Kong's arm comes into frame and grabs a tree. Again, his arm's looking smaller than it should be, I think, but he grabs a big tree. It just felt strange. What was he grabbing that for? What is he doing? Does he just pick up trees a lot? We've only seen him do it twice in the movies because he's using them as weapons. Maybe it's because in like the 2005 film Kong Eats Trees, maybe it's kind of like that where he's munching on a tree. I'm not totally sure. Don't know what that was supposed to symbolize. But yeah, Kong shows up to grab a tree. Mike has bad friends, man. How does nobody notice how sick he is? Guy is visibly getting worse by the second and nobody seems to notice. I really think he actually might die in one of these episodes. I think towards the end of the show he might reunite Cap with his son and then just die. That'd be really sad if he does. I liked the big ant reveal where the skeleton slowly starts to get pulled away. That was nice and creepy. A good way to build suspense. I liked that they were building suspense here rather than just going for a big shock moment. And I love that Annie went down there to help them. Good for her. I'm not sure why the ant was so indestructible, however. You'll have to let me know in the comments. Maybe ants are a lot more armored in real life than I'm giving them credit for, but I would have assumed that he would have stabbed right into that ant's head the same way that they were able to shoot the mother longlegs into pieces. She was not armored, but maybe ants have stronger armor than spiders. I don't know. I'm sure they do. It makes sense that they would. They seem proportionally stronger, so I'm sure they would, but it was weird that the sword just snapped like that. I get that it's old as well. I get that too. Yeah, Annie kind of cringes me out sometimes. Her like whole, I killed everything with my hands. I don't know. Some of that stuff, it tests my suspension of disbelief a little too hard, but I loved the way she tricked Dog into helping her. It was a great reveal where he comes down to save her, and that was a lot of fun. I thought she was going to go for some sneak attack on the ant by playing dead, but I loved that it was to trick Dog into helping them. What fountain is Cap talking about? Because he mentions mentions the fountain again in this episode. What is he talking about? He then decides that this island must be connected to the Hollow Earth. I don't like his visual depiction of the Hollow Earth. It's a little too accurate for me with the freaking sun down there in the mountains. Why is there a sun in the Hollow Earth? I don't know. It's also interesting that Irene knows about the Hollow Earth. I actually thought the Hollow Earth stuff in this episode was great. It was very interesting. I loved having a definitive, broader connection to the Monsterverse, especially where the Monsterverse is today. That was fantastic. But yeah, again, Houston Brooks didn't even know that there would be a sun down there. He thought it would be a big cave right under the island. He didn't realize that the actual inside of the planet was hollow, like Cap seems to know and like Irene seems to know. So that interested me a lot. One thing I was interested in is how did learning the guy's name calling on the radio help them identify which team was calling them? Do they know these guys' name? Is it just that they were worried to broadcast their names on the radio? Because it kind of felt like to me they don't use names at all. And now he's like, who are you? Tell me your name. And this guy tells him his name for the very first time. That still wouldn't identify what group you're talking about. Maybe he does know the name though. I don't know. Am I overthinking it? Yes, definitely. But I'm mostly just looking for a way to justify the fact that Mustache was a never named character. We never learned his name on screen. There's gotta be a reason for that, right? Maybe they just don't use names at all. Other than Irene, I guess. Her name is public. So now Irene wants to save the girl. Irene wants to save Annie, it seems, just because she knows that the kids are together and she seems to be forming this relationship with Cap. I actually really like her bond with Cap. I love their dynamic together, and I hope that Irene is legit and actually wants to save Annie. I think that's going to be a very interesting conflict to see play out, where Annie wants to kill Irene, but Irene no longer wants to kill Annie. However, I have a feeling Irene is just doing a little bit of a double cross as a bit of a trickster. Because why not just order your guys not to shoot on the radio? Why not just order them not to shoot? That'd be one way to solve it. How did they get out of that hole? Last we saw them, they were stuck in the hole and then they're just back up on the top of the ground. I get the dog probably helped them out of there, but it seems suspicious to me the dog would not save Charlie or Mike, but then brings all three of them back out with him. Seemed like they just edited their way around that problem. I liked Mike and Annie's bond at the end of this episode. I thought that was a great little moment. And this episode ends with a pretty good setup for the next one, with Dog and Annie running into pinch point while the bird is hunting them. All the teams are now closing in on them. Some of the teams are being hunted by vipers. All of our characters are about to come clashing together in the next episode, and I'm very excited about that. Overall, I thought this was a pretty solid episode. I liked it a lot better than I liked 3. I didn't think that it accomplished too much, and I felt that the Kong thing was a little clickbaity, but I appreciated the episode we got. I liked what we saw. I liked the expansion of the Monsterverse lore, and I'm excited for the next one. We are going to be talking about Skull Island Season 1, Episode 5, Doggone It. What a weird title. It has nothing to do with the episode. Anyways, that's one we're talking about. This show's ramping up in a big way. I liked this one a lot. We are on the road to the conclusion and it feels nice. Some of the earlier episodes were a little uneventful. This one was not. Finally, Charlie noticed how bad Mike is doing. I mean, oh my god, this guy is dying over here and nobody noticed for multiple episodes now. But how did those guards not hear them talking and standing up just right next to them in the grass? I did love the little joke when both groups realized that they were being used as bait. I thought that was a lot of fun. Although the fact that I'm starting to like these random soldiers now makes it especially apparent that nobody has names in this show. Why does nobody get named in this show? Nobody has names ever. I think it's kind of weird. But I did like that joke. Good mountains, good background, very Skull Island looking, even though that red forest still feels out of place to me. The rest of it looks just like the Skull Island I know and love. I would really love if Legendary would put out a map of Skull Island updated with where all these locations take place, because I just can't visualize it. I'm assuming my headcanon is that pretty much this entire show takes place on the west coast of the island, because we know that east is best, west is worst. We know that most of the stuff we go visit in Kong Skull Island is not on the west of the island. The furthest west we ever make it is the Boneyard, which I believe is more central. So I'm wondering, where does this all take place? I'm thinking this whole show has to be taking place on the west side of the island. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second, because that's where I think the temple is as well, but I do like the terrain that we see. It looks Skull Island enough to me. Nice action sequence here at the start of the episode, although it's much shorter lived than I would have expected, and we have seen in the trailer that Dog eats some dudes, so apparently these guys are not going to be on the right foot with Annie and Dog, especially after this episode. Rest in peace, Dog. That Phoenix got him snatched right up, which makes me think the Phoenix is trained. I think the Phoenix might have been trained by Kong to bring sacrifices to him, because I think he might be hungry. Does that mean Kong Kong ate mustache from the other episode? I don't know. That's a pretty ambiguous thing, but a very morally questionable thing for Kong to have done. I think Mike was in the right for splitting up from Charlie here. I think Mike made the right call. I don't think he should have brought Charlie into this group that he thought was dangerous. We also got a lot of big reveals in this episode, such as learning that Irene is the woman that Mike and Hero were talking about in episode 2. I'm glad we got that paid off because I forgot about that, which means this show is consistent in telling its story. It'll probably hold up pretty well on rewatches for that reason, but it's interesting knowing that she's the one who hired them in the first place. What even is that thing that the soldiers are moving? What is it, an egg? It doesn't look like a spore or anything. It looks like maybe an egg. I at first thought it was going to be one of the heads of one of the snapping plants from the previous episode, but it isn't. So I'm thinking it's going to be an egg of some sort. I'm not sure. Where did all the tents come from as well? And also, they have tranquilizers now. Didn't they say they needed those to get airdropped to them? Did we just never see that? Did that just get glazed over? The native spooking Charlie was a great scene. I love the native design. I like the way she doesn't speak, but instead gestures. That's very Iwi of her. I like how fast she is. She's got a great presence in this scene. A really good introduction to this character. Very intriguing and mysterious. I'm assuming it's a she just because we have seen a female native in the trailers. Does this imply that there's a relationship between her and the bird? I'm not really sure. She seems to be aware of it and know what it wants. Kind of feel like she's the one who baited Charlie out there to get snatched by the bird. Is the bird obedient to her? Is it obedient to Kong? Is it trying to feed Kong? Is she trying to feed things to Kong using it? I have no idea. Many questions I have a feeling will be answered in the next episode or so. When Charlie gets snatched and they're flying in, the mountain range looks great. Again, very Kong Skull Island. I like to think that maybe this big mountain is the big mountain from Kong Skull Island. Maybe we're just seeing a different side of it or the underneath of it now. I'm not sure. So Cap notices instantly how bad Mike is doing, which makes me think that Mike just has the worst friends in the world. But here's where we learn that Mike and Hero were hired by Irene to find Skull Island, and that's what they were doing out there in the first place, and they just didn't tell Cap because he didn't want funding from outside sources. Turns out she already sent people out on a different ship first, and they discovered Annie's Island, which is why Irene's crew is out there, because they were there going to pick up Annie from Annie's Island. Clearly they're looking for Annie because I think it's very obvious at this point. They almost state it in this episode that Irene is Annie's mom, which is kind of a theory I've been building over the last couple episodes, but I just didn't mention because I kind of thought I might be just wildly wrong, but I have kind of been picking up on clues that they might have some sort of connection to each other, and it seems that this is Annie's mom. But then why the soldiers to gather materials, and why the secrecy? What is going on? I still think Irene is a bad guy. I still think Irene probably works for Monarch. I'm still gonna stick on the Monarch side because I don't think Apex is very realistic for this show. I'm gonna stay on the Monarch side, and I'm thinking that this just might be we're seeing a darker side of Monarch than we've ever seen before. That's gonna be my big theory. That's gonna be what I'm gonna guess the plot twist of season 1 is. Would feel weird to have an entry of the Monsterverse that doesn't address Monarch at all. That would feel strange. So that's my guess. I like how they give extra weight and emotion to Hero's death after all these episodes. I also think Cap is such a great dad. What a good guy. He's just looking out for Mike. I loved that scene. So where is this foggy area? I'm thinking it's going to be on the west side of Skull Island where we've explored less. Maybe we're going to the giant mountain in the middle of the island, but maybe not. The only reason I think that is because it's got a giant face carved into the mountain, which might be the Skull Mountain from Kong Skull Island, even though the design has changed quite a bit. This show is also the show that portrays the Monsterverse Kong with black fur rather than brown fur, which is just a crazy thing to mess up. So if they're going to mess that up, then I could see them also messing up the fact that the face doesn't look like that in Kong Skull Island, but I don't know. Maybe this isn't that. Maybe it's a brand new spot. I don't know. But it's strange because there is this enormous Hollow Earth-sized temple located on the island. Why don't the Iwi live here? Why don't they visit it? So I'm thinking that it's going to be on the west side of the island because it's going to be on the more dangerous side. That's why I'm thinking that they've got a big moat around it, as I'll talk about later. I think this is in a very hostile, dangerous place. I don't think that humans can really coexist here. I think that's why this is all isolated, and that's why it's kind of in ruins. I like the bond between Dog and Charlie in this episode. I think it develops very naturally. And the little nose touch that they do reminds me of Weaver and Kong, which was then referenced by Godzilla King of the Monsters with Madison and Mothra, whereas in and of itself, the Weaver-Kong moment was a reference to Jurassic Park. So I think it's a fun moment. I wonder how smart Dog is in this episode because he clearly has an understanding of some English. If the average dog is of the intelligence of somewhere around a 2-year-old child, then I'm thinking maybe Dog in this show is somewhere around a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old. I think he's got a very basic understanding of human concepts. He's obviously grown up with Annie for many years, so he's heard her speak English since he's a puppy. I'm thinking that maybe the two of them have worked out some basic commands and training. He clearly knows her name. But I think a lot of the stuff in this episode where it seems like he's understanding Charlie is just kind of the viewer filling in the gaps because Dog is just kind of stone-faced blank, not reacting to much of what Charlie says in this episode. Charlie's teaching him how to climb, and Dog's just standing standing there looking at him, and it doesn't take until Charlie literally gets on the thing to show Dog physically what to do that Dog starts to figure it out. Also, he's not really teaching Dog to climb, but more of inspiring him to do so, because we saw Dog just one episode ago climb in and out of the ant pit, so we know Dog can climb walls. That's not a new reveal. Also, he climbed a tree earlier as well. Dog grew on me a lot in this episode, especially the scene where they're climbing down the tower together. I thought that was a great scene, although I wish they had kept up with the more consistent animation details of showing the claws sink into the rocks. They only show it some of the time. I wish they showed it all the time, because otherwise it looks like he's just kind of gliding down nothing. Kong's reveal here is awesome and all. I thought it was a really great moment. This is the best Kong stuff we've had in the show so far, but what is up with the giant monkey bars? I think they're great. They're really cool, but they're very unrealistic and impractical. It is a nice Godzilla vs. Kong moment and shows where Kong learned to do monkey bars in the first place, because he does do it in Godzilla vs. Kong. But how are these things built? How are they structurally that sturdy? And how do they still hold up after all this time? That place is ancient and looks unattended to. Who built this thing? Was it the Kongs from the Hollow Earth? Did they come up and build this thing as their first course of action on Skull Island? It just seems strange to me. The music in this scene was awesome, however. I really liked it. So does Kong live in this temple, or does he live on the mountain we saw him on Kong's Skull Island? This temple kind of feels out of place for the MonsterVerse for me. It feels like this should have been something we would have known about by now, but the fact that it's just turning up makes me go, what? Although there are ruins on Skull Island, specifically around the Iwi village, so maybe there has been a more advanced human society that used to live on this island before the Skullcrawlers invaded. They are an invasive species after all. That very well could be the case. If that's the case, this is very King Kong 2005 with the ruins and the jungle temple and the history that used to be but can no longer be anymore because of the dangers of the island have gotten too strong. In that case, I kind of am into it, but I just wish it had a bit more setup and context in the MonsterVerse. Kong's temple does remind me a lot of the Godzilla temple that we see in the Hollow Earth. It also reminds me of some of the stuff we see in that King Kong animated series cartoon, but it does have some connections to the Godzilla temple from the Hollow Earth in that both of them featured statues of their specific deity standing as a humanoid creature, although it makes way more sense for Kong to do it. It's also of a similar size and scale. I like how they depict Kong here as a sad and lonely creature. That is something that carries over from Kong's Skull Island very well and shows that he does have a consistent personality throughout all these movies. But I'm not sure why he would have such a personal connection to a small little artifact, this little necklace. I understand that he might have a connection to a human that used to wear it, but it feels strange for him to have some sort of sentimental value attached to an inanimate object. That's a little bit too much anthropomorphizing. Is that the right word? I don't know. I think that's right. I also think they're still drawing Kong way too small. I mean, when his finger's interacting with this necklace, they're still drawing the 50-foot King Kong. They're not drawing the 200-foot that he should be. I mean, if this takes place right before Skull Island, the birth of Kong, he's supposed to be like 230 feet, right? Seems strange. Maybe the hole around this temple is to keep skull crawlers out. It might be a moat built meant to keep skull crawlers out. That's going to be my guess. I'm also going to guess that that one native we saw is not going to be an Iwi. I think she's going to be the last descendant of whoever was living in this temple when they built the moat. Whoever was the last people to occupy this temple, that's going to be my guess, as she's the last descendant of that tribe. Because again, she has Iwi markings, but they're of a different color than the normal Iwi, which makes me think, going back to the Skull Island concept art book, she's going to be from a different tribe. Although once again, as I've acknowledged in other videos, village elders of the Iwis also wear blue. So it could be some sort of status thing, some sort of class ranking that they do. The dynamic between Cap and Irene is still great. Still enjoyed their screen time together in this episode. I like the way that she calls him out on the fact that he's just such a genuinely good guy that he can't even really tell a lie properly. One question I do have though is, if Irene is Annie's mother, how does Annie not recognize her even a little? I mean, clearly Annie was old enough to remember her dad by the time she got stranded, so it seems a little strange that she wouldn't recognize her mother, unless her mom was just a bad mom in life before and was an absent mother before she got stranded as well. That could also be the case. I like how you can see the veins on Mike's neck before it's even addressed in this episode or relevant to the plot, and this flying whale at the end of the episode was fantastic. It is a very Japanese type visual. I've seen that depicted in a lot of Japanese art, so that's really cool, but it doesn't move like it was thrown or launched. It really does move like it's flying, so I didn't love that. I also didn't love how it was so perfectly aimed that it literally nailed Kong's temple right where Kong was at that moment. How did the squid know that Kong was there? It seems weird that the squid would even know Kong was there in the first place. Although I do love the scene itself. It had a lot of great tension, and I like whenever this show goes for mystery, intrigue, and suspense over shock and awe, so I appreciated that. And overall, I thought the scene was really well executed, although it did raise a lot of questions. I like Kong's response to it as well. Like, it really sets up the rivalry between these two very well. I like how Kong does the Godzilla vs. Kong roar at the monster and then pounds the ground. Also, Kong's roar echoing and bellowing out over the whole island, again, as a very King Kong Kong 2005 thing to happen. But yeah, he does the ground pound that he does in Godzilla vs. Kong as well. That's kind of his intimidation display, other than the beating the chest. That's his other one. And then the episode ends with Mike on the ground dying. No, I don't think he's gonna die. I think if Mike's on the ground dying this early in the show, then he'll be fine. If this had happened in like the last episode, my man gonna die. If this had happened in the second to last episode, I could still see him dying. But we've got like 3 left or 4 left or something, so Mike's gonna be fine. He'll survive this. So far, I think that was probably my favorite episode of the show. I thought it had the best personal dynamics. I had a lot of good action. Definitely it gets a lot of bonus points because it had the most Kong. I thought it had lots of interesting lore setup, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, this is one of my favorites for sure, if not my favorite, but this one's right up there alongside the first episode as ones that I've really enjoyed in this show. We're going to be reviewing Skull Island Season 1, Episode 6, Terms of Endearment. All right, yes, Terms of Endearment, Episode 6. I got some mixed thoughts on this one, but I had a good time with it. I forgot to mention in the last video that there were big skullcrawler carvings all over Kong's temple. There was some showing Kong fighting them. They were coming up from the ground. There was some showing him go to war with them. I just thought it was a neat detail to add these skullcrawler things in the background. They do address it at one point in the episode, but the animation is a lot of times really hard to tell what I'm looking at. Like, it was hard to tell that they were skullcrawlers. I had to really spend some time trying to look at those images to figure out what they were. And then sometimes, like, when they're looking down that big pit, and they're like, oh my gosh, how'd we get way up here on this cliff? It's oftentimes hard to tell what they're even looking at because it was so covered in fog, so sometimes the animation shoots itself in the foot. Again, even though I do like the animation generally, I'm still not really sold on the art style because it does have issues like this. So I just wanted to mention all of that right up at the top. But yes, I really enjoyed Episode 6. I thought it was a good time, although I actually didn't like any of the characters this episode. Every person annoyed me in this episode. I really loved the flashback scene at the start of this episode. Young Annie's design was great, really hooked you on the emotion of that character. It was a really emotional backstory overall as well. These scenes were handled with proper care and dedication. The story came first. I really appreciated that. Really good vocal performances and shot choices, and it was a really well done backstory. I thought overall it was really great. This also does confirm that Dog can be killed by a single rifle, meaning Dog is not as powerful as he has been made out to be earlier in this show. I don't know how the current Dog could survive machine gun fire when the previous Dog died to what just looks like a regular hunting rifle, but that appears to be the case. How do these handcuffs even work? I mean, how did these even hold Annie down? They make no sense. I mean, the handcuff is tied to a rope which is staked into the ground. Why wouldn't they just handcuff her to the stake? She can remove the stake either way, so it's not holding her down. So what is up with that? It was a really weird way to handcuff her. It's not important to the plot, but I just found it strange. We finally have a name for this soldier. His name is Sam, and I really like Sam. He's actually one of my favorite characters in this show. I'm glad Annie finally showed even the slightest bit of care for Mike, although that's very short-lived in this episode. And I'm surprised that she was the first to figure out that the injury on his chest came from the time he was zapped by the squid. I don't know why Mike didn't just say, hey guys, I got electrocuted by that squid and also it poisoned me. I'm surprised Annie was the first to connect those dots. I agree with Sam's theory that that squid thing is just a dick. I think that's a really funny theory that he has on it. The humor is very in line with some of the stuff we've seen in the MonsterVerse so far, so I appreciated it. Annie is still a bad friend in this episode. Annie takes a lot of L's in this episode. I actually dislike her following this episode. I was on shaky ground with her up to this point, and this episode really sold me on the Annie L train. I'm not big on her here. Yeah, she's a really bad friend. It seems the only thing she truly cares about is Dog, and maybe Charlie, maybe because she has a crush on him. She just straight up gives up on Mike really quickly. Really rude. And she also gives up on Charlie really quickly too. Bad friend. I don't know why Dog and Charlie are no longer getting along after their incredible bond in the last episode. I mean, we just spent one whole episode building the relationship between these two, only for it to suddenly fall apart really quickly. I also don't know how they made it off that cliff they were stuck on in the last episode. I mean, it made it seem like they were stuck and they couldn't get across that bridge. Maybe they just did walk across the bridge and that's as simple as it is. Did it hold them up? I'm not sure if it could support their weight, but they must have gotten off of it somehow because the show just kind of moves on as if that never occurred. Good for Charlie finally having the courage to stand up to and even fight Dog. I mean, Dog kind of sucks in this episode. I don't know why he's being so rude to Charlie all of a sudden. They were just getting along, but I'm glad Charlie finally has the confidence to stand up for himself. And then this episode really sold me on Irene. I'm fully on board with Irene, and I am no longer on the Annie team. Annie sucks. She really sucks in this episode. She's the worst. Again, the emotion in these flashbacks are amazing. I really like them. They were very well done, and it's got this great first meeting between Annie and Dog. I really like the way those two met, and I really like the way they interact. I also appreciated how Dog's dad doesn't look the exact same as him. They have different color palettes, so there's a difference in these designs. They're not just a copy paste. How did that boat even flip over like that in the first place? What a weird way to have the boat crashed on the island. Young Annie and Dog have actually, in my opinion, a much better and more interesting bond and dynamic and characterization than their older selves. I thought that the younger version of these characters were far more engaging than anything the older versions have done. I would think that this dog would be a much better and more likable sidekick than the one we have in this show, although he's not more capable, and I thought that the young Annie was way more likable. And I'm gonna guess based on these flashbacks that Annie is around somewhere between 6 and 7 years old. That's kind of the impression I got, which means she should be a nicer person. She probably was raised to be better. One little detail I noticed that was an animation mistake was that Annie's jacket, the sleeves on them, changes length depending on the shot. Sometimes they're really long and her arms don't even stick out of them as it should be, and sometimes she can fully just wear them normally. I'm surprised that cold hot dog didn't kill her. That's disgusting, Annie. Cook it. You're old enough to know that you should heat that thing up. Gross. I don't know how Charlie is still hung up on college and girls at this point. I was okay with it when he was bickering with Mike because it was someone for him to be a sounding board to bounce off of, but at this point, Charlie, focus. You've got way bigger things to worry about. Although it is fun to hear him refer to Skull Island as Monster Island again during his little rant, I'm just surprised that he's still hung up on that. The purple grass in the background is a really beautiful touch. It was a really nice little thing that they added. Annie wanting to kill things is still cringe. Oh my god, Annie, you suck in this episode. Get over yourself. You're weird. You're a weirdo. I appreciate the aloe turtle was brought back into play and is actually relevant to the plot, but it would have been more interesting to see it show up and then collect the aloe off of it rather than to just mention it. But I do like that it has relevance to this story. I also think it's an interesting way to heal Mike, and it's pretty much along the lines of what I thought they would do in this episode. I really thought they would heal him in some way just like that, so I'm glad to see that they did that. Sam's a real one. I mean, we love Sam. He's such a great and supportive friend. I really appreciate him in this show. I think he's a great presence. I really liked the scene where Irene and Annie finally hash it out and argue. I also like the way that it pays back to episode 1 when Charlie and Cap go at it. I thought it was a good way to pay off that dynamic and show that Cap has learned from that and now it's time for Irene to learn from that. Some of the dialogue in this scene was a little strange. Like, I don't really know why Irene had to mention that she's super rich. It felt like very forced exposition. That part was a little clunky to me. And oh my god, Annie sure does suck. Wow, this flashback scene ruined her for me. This is the scene that broke this character for me. She can be cringe all she wants. She can be threatening all she wants, but this flashback scene right here is crazy how things actually went down on that beach. I really would have thought, and I think they should have, had the soldiers open fire first on Dog, but oh my god, Annie and Dog are just the worst, completely ambushing Irene's crew and killing them. They were the attackers. Irene's crew has to be revealed to be bad people later in this show to justify this scene, because at the moment, Dog and Annie are murderers of innocent people who did not deserve it. It's also weird to me. Annie, you're stranded on an island and you finally see people and your first thought is to kill them all? You were a human living in civilization. You should know that people are not always bad, and you should have been excited to see them, maybe even wanting to get rescued. I mean, she says in this episode she did not want to be found or rescued, but why? Why? You were stuck on a monster island. That makes no sense. It would feel more likely that she would want to be rescued and want Dog to be taken with her rather than her to just attack these people and kill these random humans who she has never met before. Annie, you were not stranded for long enough to justify this. If you had been lost there as a baby, then maybe I could understand. But you weren't. You were like 7 years old. Oh my god, you're a bad person. You're the bad person, not Irene. Don't call her out. So far, you have just recontextualized this entire show to make it that she has done nothing wrong, and I'm sure she will be revealed to be a bad guy. I just feel it. I feel like this crew is going to be bad people. They're going to be up to no good. I mean, why are they collecting samples? But at the moment, you've just cleared her name, made her innocent. Annie, you suck. You're the worst. I mean, there is some fishy stuff going on because Irene in a previous episode said that she was hired to bring them back to the United States government, right? That's what they said earlier. Or somebody said that. Maybe Mustache said it. So what is the real truth going on here? I don't know. But at the moment, Annie, you're the worst. Even if they do turn out to be bad people, you shouldn't have attacked them first. You're still bad. Great monster tree reveal. I mean, that was classic Skull Island right there. It was so awesome. I wish those things posed a bit more of a threat. Those little gremlins, they were so cool. Such a cool design, such cool concepts. I just wish they were a bit more threatening and a bit more imposing. I wish they got some kills in or something in this episode, and I wish Dog and Charlie were not able to fight them off so easily. It's also weird because I looked it up and they're called like Night Boys. Where does that name come from? They were never referred to as Night Boys in this episode. What a weird name for them. But they're great. I really loved them. I hope we see more of them in the Monsterverse moving forward because I thought they were awesome. They also could have been, if they wanted to keep up with the Skull Island lore, they they could have replaced those guys with death jackals. That would have been a nice deep cut reference for us fans, but I'll take what I can get. I'd like to see a death jackal fight a Nightboy. That'd be a cool fight. So Dog just abandons Charlie straight up. Like, what happened to their friendship from the last episode? Huge dog yell right there. Even if it does wind up saving Annie in the long run, Charlie might have died right then, dog. What the hell? Annie should have really done worse in her fight. Again, she's handcuffed. I don't really buy the fact that she's such a good fighter with handcuffs on. I mean, I know all she does is hop on two monsters, but it still felt weird to me. I'm also surprised that her handcuff chains didn't get broken by the monster's teeth. You'd think it would have. I mean, the thing seemed pretty powerful. If this show was Kong Skull Island the movie, Cap would have died right before he hugged Charlie. I mean, I felt it in my bones that Cap was gonna get eaten by one of those night crawlers right before he hugged Charlie, and then he just didn't, which made me go, oh yeah, the show's still for a bit younger of an audience than the movie Kong Skull Island, which is a bit more cynical. But I like that Charlie and Cap are finally reunited. That's good stuff. I'm glad Irene finally holds her men off from shooting Dog, and I'm glad that Annie decides to save her and stick around with them, but damn, Annie, what a cold-hearted bastard you are. Not caring about Mike, just being like, Mike's gonna die, by the way. And then also being so petty, demanding Irene to apologize for defending herself against you and your monstrous dog. I'm on Irene's team. You're the worst. You tried to murder innocent people, and you did murder some. Again, even if they're bad people. She didn't know that. What? Why are you making her apologize? I get it. She grew up on a monster island. She doesn't really understand human concepts. She's so far removed. She's desensitized, and I get it. I get that she's immature and basically has the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. I get it, but oh my god, you're still a bad person. Leave her on the island, guys. It was also interesting to find out the reveal that Irene did not hire the original ship to look for Annie. They just stumbled upon her. I love the way they draw the night sky in this show. I like the way that they just stick the actual Milky Way system back there visible in the background, but I really do miss the aurora that should be taking over the night skies of Skull Island. I mean, I know it doesn't happen all the time, but I'd like at least one night of that in this show. I'm actually shocked that Squid can reach Mr. America all the way from in the water when they're up on that hill. That seems like a crazy arm span that thing has. It's a little wild to me how far that thing can stretch at times. I think at times they push the Squid Kraken a little too far and make him a little unbelievable for me, but I do like the ending when Charlie decides that the plan is to weaponize Kong. It had good music, and it's a nice monsterish setup. It's a very let them fight moment. I like it. Alright, that's my thoughts on that one. Overall, I really liked the episode. I thought it had a great plot. I loved the reveals this episode, but I felt that the characters were off. They were not on the mark in this episode. At times, Irene was a bit annoying. At times, even Cap was a little strange. Mike was off in this episode. I mean, he's mostly not in it. Charlie and Dog are back having their weird beef again, and Annie took so many L's this episode that it was hard to get over it. But overall, I thought it was a good one. I think it ramps up towards this finale very well, and I'm very excited to see these final 2 episodes. Okay, alright, let's do it. We're going to be reviewing Skull Island Season 1, Episode 7, You're Not a King, You're Just a Stupid Animal. I understand why this is the fan favorite of the show. I've been told ever since the show came out that this was going to be my favorite episode. I finally got to see it, and now I understand why. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so Episode 7, You're Not a King, You're Just a Stupid Animal, is pretty much entirely told from Kong's point of view. That's why this is the fan favorite. This is the first MonsterVerse thing that has focused 100% the main character is the Titan, this being Kong. Obviously, Kong is a character we have proven time and time again since 1933 that he can carry a film and carry a story on his own. This is just the culmination of that. I understand why this is the fan favorite episode, but I have to say, do you guys remember that one comment I mentioned many videos ago? That one comment rattling around that's been in my brain and I didn't need it in there. That one that I was like, I wish I never read that comment. The one that said, the way I feel about this show is how you feel about Godzilla Awakening. I think I get it. I think I understand why. Because although I thought this was a great episode, I thought it was a fantastic story, I thought as an isolated episode, this episode was incredible. It makes me question why this show is in the MonsterVerse. One thing I will say is that I appreciate that this show is more consistent with the MonsterVerse that we know than, say, the Pacific Rim anime was to Pacific Rim when it went, let's throw Pacific Rim out the window. What if we did our own thing and none of that matters? mattered. But then they build it as if it was like gonna be a continuation of that story, and it just wasn't at all. This is, I would say, definitively a continuation of the MonsterVerse story, but whereas that Pacific Rim anime felt like 20 steps removed from the Pacific Rim movies, this Skull Island anime feels like 1 or 2 steps removed from the MonsterVerse. I would say, like, if the comic books feel 1 step removed from the movies, this show feels another step removed from the comics, which makes it 2 steps away from the MonsterVerse. That's kind of how I feel about this episode. Because while I did enjoy it, I have a lot of issues with it. Particularly, my biggest issue for this episode is that this episode takes place at the wrong time. Now, if this episode had been set anywhere from 20 to 100 years before the events of Kong Skull Island, nothing, not one thing in this episode would have to change except one single line of dialogue. One line of dialogue would have to change. Then we would be better set. The way that this operates now is, okay, we'll all go through it. I'll work through the episode with everybody the same way I always do. I have a lot more notes this time than normal because obviously this was a jam-packed episode. It was great. There's so much to bite into, so many incredible little Easter eggs and details that I want to talk about. So I'll go through the episode, but again, I'm going to be talking about how, although I loved it, I don't know if I love it as part of the MonsterVerse. Time will tell. Obviously, I'm somebody who takes canon consistency very seriously when it comes to this stuff. So a lot of the times I'll be throwing a curveball, like having, I don't know, Godzilla and Kong stand on a boat and it doesn't sink, and then I'll have to give it a couple years and then I go, all right, I'm on board, whatever, it can happen. So I'm sure at some point I'll settle into the fact that, all right, we're rolling with it. This is just how it is. But it's going to take more than just this show. It's going to take acknowledgement of the events of this show in one of the movies for me to finally feel like that this show truthfully is part of the MonsterVerse, because it does feel, like I said, 2 steps removed. It feels like, okay, this takes place in a parallel dimension. Again, I'm going to need a movie to acknowledge the events of this show for me to feel like it has been set in stone. And I don't know if that's going to happen, at least not with Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. I don't think that movie's going to touch on any of this stuff. In fact, that movie has some issues that will directly contradict some of the stuff in this show, and I definitely plan on making a video about that when some of those details from Godzilla x Kong kind of come to the public a little bit more. Starting out, I really loved the cinema aspect ratio. It's something that we've had for all the flashbacks in this show, but personally, I just think it looked a little prettier. I guess I've just been accustomed to that by being a film student, but I don't traditionally always love the cinema aspect ratio, but I do think it looks really nice in this episode. I also loved the Skullcrawler design. It has such an incredible redesign, so great. It looked incredibly fluid. I loved it, and it was a great way to tie this into the MonsterVerse. One thing I will say with it though is I could not tell how big it was supposed to be. She has the spines and the back of the Ramarak, the giant Skullcrawler from the end of Kong Skull Island, but she seems small enough to be like the normal sized Skullcrawlers that attacked the Boneyard when compared to that native. However, when Kong airdrops on it and kills it, in a very fast fight by the way, just showing how much Kong has evolved as a fighter since then, great stuff. When he drops in on him, he's like not as big as you'd think he would be compared to it, which makes me think this was supposed to be kind of the size of the big one. Now I knew from the start that this was not the same native as the other episodes, because the second she ran onto screen, she does not have the tattoos on her arm that she needs to. I actually noticed that while editing the other video where I mentioned that I thought that it was the same native. I noticed while editing that video that she was not wearing the iwi tattoos, meaning this is not an iwi, and sure enough it isn't. I'm shocked that the Skullcrawler didn't just snatch up that native with its tongue and eat her up. That seems like a very Skullcrawler thing to do. I guess this one was just being patient because the plot asked it to. I don't know where Kong found that tree branch that he uses to kill this thing with. I think that's a tree branch. It's kind of golden colored, so I couldn't quite tell, but I think it's a tree branch. That thing is so strong it could pierce straight through a Skullcrawler's armored plated head. I loved the fatality, very brutal, but I would have preferred it to be a rock and not a stick because I feel like a tree branch would have broken. Hi, welcome to the standing version of this desk. I'll also mention now that, yeah, Kong using the tree against the Skullcrawler is a reference to the fact that one time Kong used the tree against the Skullcrawler. So more Easter eggs for ya. But it was a great scene, great Kong introduction. I loved that whole moment. It looked great. Shots were great. It was really good stuff. So this is the first time the MonsterVerse Kong has picked somebody up officially in the capacity that his other Kong counterparts have. Of course, Kong has really only held Weaver in the MonsterVerse up to date. That's the only human he's held in the MonsterVerse so far on screen. Maybe he does in the comic books, I can't remember. But on screen, it's the only human he's held so far, and he holds her in the palm of his hand. He doesn't hold her like this. So it's fun to see Kong actually hold a woman in the way that the other Kongs do. I also love how sassy he is and how this Kong is clearly like, oof, I don't like picking people up. He's above it. I like that he doesn't want to pick her up. I think that's fun. He is drawn way closer to his Kong Skull Island height throughout this whole episode. Sometimes he's way smaller than that. Sometimes he's definitely like the 50-foot Kong. And sometimes he's drawn like he's the appropriate 200-ish feet that he should be. But for the most part, they do draw him at about 100 feet, I would say, compared to that girl. Yeah, okay, it's a flashback episode, so maybe that makes sense. Maybe. I don't know how big he should be then. Like maybe 150-ish feet? I don't know. But maybe it checks out. Maybe. There's another little King Kong detail for you here in this scene as the girl rides on Kong's shoulder in a very similar way to the way that Dwan rides up Kong's shoulder as he climbs the Twin Towers. The relationship with this native mirrors Kong's relationship with Gia, although this one is way more developed. It seems like this is where that relationship with Gia is headed if they have enough time to spend together. I think it kind of weakens the Gia relationship personally. I'm not 100% sold on this relationship with this native girl because the whole thing that made Kong's relationship with Gia so strong is that the two of them could communicate together. Kong doesn't necessarily understand verbal communication, but he does understand sign language. That's what made their connection so strong. That's what gave them such a powerful bond, and they have erased that now. Now it turns out all you had to do was speak Spanish, because apparently Kong speaks Spanish perfectly. Don't know what's up with that, so I didn't love that. I'm not personally a fan of that. I think that it weakens the relationship with Gia, makes it less special. I like that Kong climbs this mountain. Again, it's another Kong Skull Island moment. Kong's headed up a mountain. That's good stuff. We're going back to what we know. We're going back towards the Monsterverse, but it's not the same mountain. It's not the same lookout that he sits on, which again makes me say it's 2 steps removed. He has a mountain, he has a sit out, but it's not the same spot. I will say I literally cheered out loud when the Aurora showed up. That's all I've ever wanted. That is all I've wanted in this show. That's all I've ever wanted. All right, I'm back on board with this episode, and it's the best thing that's ever happened. This is the best thing that's happened to the Monsterverse since 2017's Kong Skull Island. I've just decided. I love that they added it back. It was almost like they heard me in my last review where I said, hey, the night sky is great and all, but where's that Aurora? And then they went, here it is. Good stuff, man. Thank you to the animators and the writers and everybody else. A lot of this episode kind of felt like somebody had heard some of my pitches for the Monsterverse previously and taken them and ran with them in a bit different of a direction than I would have, but I appreciated that they were there. I think it's great that the Auroras were here, and it was such a beautiful visual. Speaking of the native, what is she? She speaks Spanish. She looks white. Is she like Spanish? Is she that kind of Spanish? I also know that Spanish is a language spoken in some of the Philippines region. Maybe she's from the Philippines because, again, Skull Island is supposed to be in the South Pacific. Now, that was something that confused me. She's not an Iwi, clearly, because she's not Asian. The Iwis are Asians. She's not. I would have preferred, personally, I think what they should have done is had her be a Vietnamese character. Then they would have stayed in line with Kong Skull Island by having her speak Viet. She'd still be speaking a different language. I think it would be far more interesting and far more in line with what we have seen so far if she was Vietnamese. But that's to say, what is she doing on this island? Is she shipwrecked? That's something that I really want to talk about. That's what I was alluding to earlier in this video. One of the issues that Godzilla vs. Kong has presented that they will be continuing to develop in Godzilla X Kong. The Iwi are supposed to be shipwrecked, so I like that she seems to be shipwrecked. Again, seems like they really are building on some of the concept art and other ideas that Jordan Vogt Roberts had for Kong Skull Island, and this seems to be one of those. So she is in fact from a different village, and she is in fact not an Iwi. I was wondering if they were looking at the Iwi village when they were setting up in the mountain because you see the lights in the distance. I thought that would have been phenomenal if that was the Iwi village. That'd be a great way to just reference the fact that they're on the island but not visit them personally. Of course, I do think that this is the village by the seashore that we see later in the episode. I think that this is the village that native is from. I don't think it's the Iwi village, but it would have been, I think, more interesting if it was the Iwi village. One of my biggest critiques about this episode is that this episode overly humanizes Kong, gives him way too deep of a human characterization. I've seen a lot of people say this movie is the best characterization Kong has ever gotten, and for me personally, that's still Godzilla vs. Kong. I think that's the gold standard for how to tell a story with Kong that humanizes him to an extent we've never seen before, gives him the ability to communicate with humans and understand humans on a basic level, but doesn't overdo anything. Kong can't fully understand every single thing a human says. He can listen, but mostly he's just following the sign language. He clearly understands sign language, and I liked that because because it was still staying in the realm of realism where real life apes can understand sign language. They can't understand our verbal speech as well. So I appreciated that Godzilla vs. Kong was taking Kong in a direction where they were humanizing him, but also keeping him an animal. They were keeping him an animal and monstrous. I personally think Kong Skull Island has the more interesting depiction of Kong in the Monsterverse as a noble god. I think that's far more interesting, but you also can't do as much with that, which is why I do think you needed to add those human elements in Godzilla vs. Kong, because that makes the character more applicable to wider sets of circumstances and lets you do more with him. But the Kong in this episode is taken so far that he actually reminds me of Kong from King Kong Lives, where for some reason the Kong from the 1976 film, which was also sort of portrayed as an animal slash god, but mostly an animal, all of a sudden was portrayed as just some dude. It was weird when they did that in that movie, and it's kind of weird that they're doing it here too. He's just a little too human for me. I would have preferred him to be a bit more monstrous. He understands more than Dog does. Dog seems to understand less than Kong does, and Dog seems to speak English perfectly. So I don't know. They're taking it a little bit too far. Again, 2 steps too far is how I feel about this whole episode. In a way, this episode would have worked perfectly if we said, well, this was removed. This was before Kong Skull Island. You know, his connections to this native, this is all before. The reason he winds up this kind of quiet, noble, sad guy that we meet in Kong Skull Island is because all of this has happened in his past. But that's not what we're being told. We're being told he went from being this sad, noble, quiet god to being this playful teenager to then being again another sad, less noble warrior that we meet in Godzilla vs. Kong. I don't understand the progression of Kong in this show. I think what they should have said is this episode was set before the events of Kong Skull Island. But it isn't, because really quickly into the episode, the native, who's never named by the way, mentions the people who came from the sky and their flying machines. I like how they refer to them as the flying people from the sky. Just going back to that Skull Island, the birth of Kong lore. It's a real shame because, again, had this episode taken place before Kong Skull Island, Kong's character arc would make more sense. It makes less sense for this episode to be set when it does. Just rolling with the episode. Now we're back to just rolling with it and accepting it. I think it's funny that Kong's into the idea of a Mechani-Kong. Like, he clearly likes that idea, which makes me wonder how he felt when he met Mechagodzilla. I mean, maybe the reason he gets so angry when he sees Mechagodzilla, because he gets instantly angry at him. And you know, it could be because Gia tells him that that's a bad guy, but it also could be because it's reminding him of this native that he had this bond with. Beautiful, beautiful Aurora. Great shot. I love it. Thank you, everybody involved in this show. We need more of that in the Monsterverse, please. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Rest in peace, that hedgehog cat. I don't know what that thing's called. I forget. I think it's like a porcupine or a hedgehog. I think it'd make a great companion sidekick to Dog. You have Dog and then you get a cat to go along with it. But this guy dies. He deserved better. Rest in peace. Also, that confirms that Kong did eat Mustache. That confirms that the Phoenix takes people to Kong to eat. I saw somebody in my comments on one of the previous videos defending the action of eating a human, saying Kong has done it in the past, therefore is not morally ambiguous. I know you're going to watch this video because you watch all the videos. I'm not saying that it isn't something Kong has done in the past. Kong has eaten people as early as the 1933 film. Not my issue with it. I'm just saying it is morally questionable and not a real chill thing for Kong to do. He should know better. He knows people. He should know better than to eat people. Monsterverse Kong isn't a people eater. The one guy he ate in Kong Skull Island was a total accident. He didn't mean to do that. This scene's got a lot of little Easter eggs going on as well. I mean, obviously the whole setup of putting things on a podium for Kong as a sacrifice is very clearly a tribute to the way that they did that in all the other movies. Although here he's eating them rather than just taking them away. However, it is implied in those other movies that maybe Kong was eating his tributes, or at least leaving them to die. So it still kind of carries a similar weight, I guess. And it just goes again to show that Kong's always hungry, always eating. So Kong's looking at this statue of himself, which reminds me a lot of that King Kong 2005 storybook, for those of you who remember that. It's also something he does in the Godzilla vs. Kong movie, looks at a statue of himself. But this whole temple thing, this whole reveal, this whole statue of Kong, and he's looking at a reflection of himself, it all just goes to weaken the impact of that incredible moment in Godzilla vs. Kong when he finds something of his own species. He finds the temple, the first thing he has ever encountered that truthfully represents where he comes from and what his lineage is, his past, his history, and he truly for the first time sees the mark of his own species. Now that impact is completely lost because it turns out he just lived in a temple just like that one, that had statues just like that one, and so this really isn't anything special to him. Good stuff here with Kong being lonely and wanting more of his kind. Looking at that statue sets up for Godzilla vs. Kong very well, but I'm surprised to see that this temple is already abandoned. I wonder what this place was. I'll talk a bit more about that towards the end of the video, but yeah, I wonder what this place is, and I wonder why this moat already exists around it, if not to keep skull crawlers out. I wonder what's up with that. Kong totally Gyras or Green Gargantua's that native coming up out of the water under her when she's fishing, meaning that he can totally hold his breath and swim way better than we've ever realized in the MonsterVerse before, because he was stealthy enough to get underneath her without her noticing. I also like how Kong uses the Phoenix to see if something's wrong. It's like his scout. I think that's a really interesting use of those two together. Rest in peace, the Skur Buffalo. Is that how you say that? Skur? Scare? I don't know. Rest in peace, the big buffalo. I liked seeing that Kong Skull Island cameo. It was a good little nod to that movie. And again, just ties nicely with the lore of the MonsterVerse Skull Island. And again, it's a good way to tie back to that movie with Kong coming to the rescue of another one of those Skur Buffaloes. And maybe that's what gets him so upset about the whole situation, is that he just loves that type of animal. It's a big friend of his, something like that. So I appreciated it. I wonder why Kong has beef with these chameleons. I mean, are they not supposed to be part of the natural order? Isn't them killing animals kind of their gig? That's just what they do? I mean, is Kong's whole thing that he doesn't like things eating other things? Because then he partakes in eating other things as well. So I was wondering why he was having beef with them. I think it would have been more interesting if it was explained that they were supposed to stay in the caves under Skull Island, and then them being on the surface was an issue. You could easily have the natives say something like that. There's just something about the way Kong moves in this episode that is very reminiscent of King Kong from King Kong Lives. The way he runs on all fours, the way he expresses himself, the way he emotes. It just reminds me a lot of that King Kong. Those natives that Kong runs past, they're just like real soldiers, like normal soldiers. Seemed kind of out of place for Skull Island. They're not Iwis, so I'll give them the pass. Different culture and all, but it just seemed like they were a bit too advanced. Interesting new desert location here. I wonder where that is on the Skull Island map. Again, this show really needed to track where things were, because it gets very confusing how there's so much terrain that we've never explored. Seeing Kong on a stakeout is kind of weird because it's a bit too human of a thing for him to do, but I think it's interesting seeing the way he strategizes. Reminds me of in Godzilla vs. Kong, the way he gets the high ground on Godzilla so that he can come up with a strategy to fight him. It's also fun to see that they return to a boneyard, much like in Kong Skull Island, in order to deal with these little critters. It was a bold choice to make Kong cocky and immature in this scene, rather than just animalistic and aggressive. I don't know why they had to humanize him to the extent they did. I think it would have been more compelling if Kong was animalistic and aggressive and still did all of the same actions while fighting these guys, just simply with different motivation, because as it stands, he kind of does it just because he's being defiant to that native. It makes him a little less sympathetic, considering this sets in motion the whole chain of events that leads to the entire civilization getting wiped out. Kong bringing that rock to the edge of the cliff is a very human thing for him to do. It's a very boys will be boys moment. Boys love dropping big rocks, so it's good to see Kong's one of the boys, although if you notice, there's a lot of blood down there. That blood will disappear in the rest of the fight scene, but that's just one of those little interesting animation errors that I think are fun to point out. Why does Kong struggle in this fight against a couple lizards so much? You'd think Kong would wipe the floor with these guys, but no, he really struggles with these guys. I don't quite understand. Fantastic tension through this scene. This scene is a masterfully done sequence, aside from the fact that Kong should hold his own better, and aside from the fact that I don't agree with the characterization of Kong being as amplified as it is. This sequence is masterfully done. It has incredible tension. It's got a great escalation as it goes. It is a super good scene. I really enjoyed the whole thing. Great stuff. Kong fighting with the bone was similar to how he fights with the tree in Kong Skull Island. He's also got pretty decent aim against this chameleon, even though it does dodge him. He does have really good aim, which again sets up for Godzilla vs. Kong when he does have surprisingly good aim when attacking Godzilla. The chameleon attacking the native and then the falcon rescuing her was an incredible sequence. I thought it was so good, and it reminded me a lot of Spider-Man No Way Home. That scene when Kong goes to catch her and she slips right past his finger, I was shocked. I really thought, oh my god, they're gonna kill her. How bold is that to kill her right after they've introduced her? And they basically do, but I felt that there was real stakes to this whole sequence. I thought it was really good. And that does go to say that there was a good bond between Kong and this native, that I was genuinely worried that she would die. That big chameleon's tongue reminds me a lot of Zedis from Gamera the Brave. I don't know if that was an intentional reference or if it's just the fact that they're both based on lizards. Could be. But I like to call everything a potential reference, so I'll call that a potential reference. I'm also interested in how smart is this Phoenix so that it knows to save her from falling. I mean, clearly Kong's got it well trained, but this thing has above the average bird's intelligence. Even on a Skull Island level, this thing seems a little smarter than any bird should. I loved the chameleon cloning Kong. That was great. I loved the way it also cloned his scars on its back. That was such a nice detail. And I love the way that Kong whipped that guy around, wiped the floor with him, completely warbatted him. Remember when he slams the warbat around? And then he took it a step further by Jason Xing that other pin pinned chameleon, which goes back to the Warbat fight where Wingard's secret reference in Godzilla vs. Kong was that the Warbat being used against the Warbat was a reference to Jason X. And now here again we have Kong using a critter as a weapon against that same exact species. Good stuff, Kong. I like the consistency. Brutal kill on that one pinned chameleon as well. He just completely smushes it under that rock. Oh gosh, Kong is ruthless when he wants to kill something. The Phoenix does a Rodan in the air in order to shake off the chameleon. That's really cool. It does the same spin move. I like that. And I cannot believe that the native survived that fall. I mean, yes, it does stick her to its tongue and then it hits the ground and then lets go and then she drops from there. But she still fell a billion feet. She was gonna die. I don't understand how she survived that. But I do like that the chameleon did because it made them a lot scarier. It made you be like, oh god, they can survive getting stabbed. That's freaky. And again, it was a great way to escalate the stakes because now she was stuck on it while it was attacking her. Kind of reminded me of that whole scene. Remember that scene in King Kong 2005 when Anna's hiding and then she finds out that she's hiding right next to the V-Rex and then he goes to bite her? Or how about that scene when she's literally stuck hanging from the V-Rex's mouth and then it's chomping at her? Parallels, guys, parallels. They're everywhere. You just gotta look for them. I like that Kong takes battle damage in this episode, and I like that it stays on him throughout the episode. Good consistency there. Kong tail swings that chameleon in order to try and kill it, which is just what he does to Godzilla in the 1962 movie. And then Kong running from all these boulders reminds me a lot of that scene from Godzilla vs. Kong when the temple's caving in on itself. I don't know if that's a reference or not, probably not, but I figured I'd mention it anyways. It's also nice to see that there's consequences for Kong's actions, like because he's so large he can trigger a rock slide at any moment. I liked that. That scene when Kong climbs up over the mountain and his hand comes up and slams down, I mean that's straight from the beginning of Kong Skull Island. They do a lot of parallel shots in this show. Like the fan blades in episode 2 is a very similar shot to in Kong Skull Island the movie. So they do a lot of parallel shots in this show. And I appreciate that this is one of them. That's a cool one to parallel. They also parallel that shot in Godzilla vs. Kong when Kong's getting out of the water onto the boat. The native wanting down, she's screaming and pounding Kong and she's saying the same dialogue as Dwan from the 76 movie wanting to be put down. It's a very similar scene. It's a very similar shot as well to when Dwan wanted out of Kong's hand. I think it's fun that she calls that thing a hawk, so I guess now we have a species identified. That thing is similar to a hawk. Oh my god, she is so rude to Kong. He has every right to be upset with her, and she has every right to be upset with him, to be fair, because apparently my dude speaks Spanish perfectly. He 100% understood what she was saying and decided to go against her. It also makes me question, earlier she was like, let's go get the others and come up with a strategy. You're telling me Kong works with humans and strategizes with them? What are we doing here, guys? You can take him a step back, please. He's not supposed to be this cooperative. He's not supposed to be this smart. He's an animal. A big one, but he's an animal. Don't ruin his arc in Godzilla vs. Kong by making him more progressed now than he will be in the future. Now he's just taking a step back later. What? I liked when she roars back at Kong. It reminded me of Madison roaring back at Ghidorah, or even to a smaller degree, Kong roaring back at Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Kong. I also like the way that the hawk rides Kong's arm. That is very fun stuff. It's a little out of place for the MonsterVerse, but hey, everything in this episode is. So I'll just say it was cool. I liked it. It was a fun visual. Just shows that Kong trained that bird really well. I don't know how he did it, but he did. There's a scene during that sequence when Kong is slamming one of the lizards against a rock and his breathing sounds just like the King Kong from 1962. That was really neat. I don't know if that was an intentional reference, but it sounded a lot like 1962's Kong. So Kong healing with the water on his shoulder, that reminded me a lot of Kong Skull Island when he's healing his hand from all the wounds. He also sounds like the 1976 King Kong in this sequence. And the blood was so great. That was such a good scene. The way that the blood slowly comes down. It's got this super ominous, spooky music that obviously we recognize as the motif of the Kraken. Good stuff. It's a really, really cool way to build this rivalry. It does, however, unfortunately place the eradication of this advanced civilization on Kong. He is the one who directly caused them to die. Very sad, very tragic, and again, it makes Kong being immature earlier in the episode a little unsympathetic. It also, again, makes me think, hey, well, this would make sense if he was gonna mature for his next appearance, being Kong Skull Island, when he's a little more reserved and mature and doesn't interact with the Iwis because he probably doesn't want to hurt them the way that he hurt these natives. But no, that happened first. Why did that happen first? Kong growling from sympathy up from the top of that mountain was a very King Kong Lives thing for him to do. That was a very King Kong Lives moment. Remember that moment in King Kong Lives when he's all pretending to be hurt so that Lady Kong will come take care of him? Reminded me a lot of that. Kong coming over the wall was a nice classic King Kong visual. It also pays off some of the concept art from Kong Skull Skull Island. I like the way that Kong tries to hand them a fruit tree and he's just trying to be helpful. It's very much like an animated King Kong thing for him to cause trouble by accidentally doing that. That came right out of the King Kong animated series right there. He's also brown in this scene. What the hell? Why is he brown in this scene? Because the lighting of the sun. Hey, he should be brown the whole show though. I like that Kong can sense something is wrong, like he can tell something's in the water, but he doesn't quite understand it, whereas Godzilla has a bit stronger of a sense for when things go awry, and Godzilla would have immediately known what was up. I like that Kong is still kind of like, well, something's going on over there. He can sense the threat, but he doesn't quite know what it means. One thing I do really like is this new village. I think it's got a great design. It kind of fits within the Skull Island aesthetic, reminds me of some of the stuff from the concept art book, and I think it's overall unique enough from the Iwi village to stand on its own as a new culture. I also like how it's on the beach side, how it's right next to the beach, how they've got a wall separating them from the rest of the island, showing how they could stay so isolated, and it reminds me a lot of the natives from the previous King Kong franchise. This is very much like the natives from the 33 film who lived right on the beach with the wall separating them from the island, so I like it. It's kind of a similar setup. This murder at sea felt very Jaws / War of the Gargantuas to me. That was great. And I love Kong coming to the rescue. That was, again, was an awesome thing to see him doing, makes him very heroic. I loved having him respond to that scream as well. He hears his native girl scream and that's what gets him to go save them. That's just like King Kong 1933 when he goes to save Anne from the T-Rex. And it's just a very King Kong thing to do, trying to save his girl when he hears her scream. It also reminds me of when Kong rushed to save Weaver after she got knocked into the water in Kong Skull Island. This scene where he discovers the destroyed village and all the bodies is downright tragic and is handled so well. It really makes you feel for Kong. This is the best they handle him in this episode, still animalistic and yet human enough to show these emotions. I also love how he is clearly afraid of the Kraken and doesn't want to go near it. That was good stuff, man. And the close-up on the eye here of Kong reminded me of Kong Skull Island, except this time sad. The native's death is so sad and is really well done. I like how she reaches out to him in kind of a Gia-esque way with her finger up, but instead of touching her finger, which is what I thought he was going to do, he puts her up to his face so that she can touch his face like what Weaver does in Kong Skull Island. You also see Kong's glowing eyes from Kong Skull Island return in this scene, which was a nice touch. And I love the way he mourns her and he buries his face into his hand where she is. That's great. One thing I was curious about is how does he set that necklace up? Also, how did he take that necklace off? He's got enormous fingers. How did he get that thing so delicately put there? And how did he even get her off her neck in the first place? It was cool to see that her temple does have Iwi paintings though. It shows that this temple was an Iwi temple at some point. I like that. And you've got a great burial scene here when Kong buries her. That was such a good moment. See, it's this whole sequence towards the end of the episode with no dialogue that makes me think that this whole episode should have had no dialogue. It should have been another unspoken bond with Kong. And then so many of my issues with this episode would be resolved because Kong's character arc would no longer be regressing into Godzilla vs. Kong. He would be progressing into his relationship with Gia. Kong wouldn't have to understand human speak as well, which would make sense given what we know of the MonsterVerse Kong. It would make him a bit more mythical, and it would make this episode a lot more special. You don't even have that much dialogue in this episode in the first place, so you didn't have to have the dialogue that you had. Beautiful scene here at the end of the episode. The sunset, the colors, it's so pretty. It also does a really good job establishing Kong's relationship with his necklace and justifying why he has feelings towards this necklace in the first place. And then you get to the modern day where Charlie comes up with this crazy rude plan to kidnap the necklace so that Kong will chase after him. It's really convenient that Charlie showed up just in time to see Kong sit there with the necklace so that he knew to steal it. Plot convenience aside, Charlie, what an asshole you are. So rude. Yeah, that's my thoughts on the episode. I feel a little bad because I know that this is the fan favorite episode and I feel like I have a lot more critiques for this episode than I normally do, and it's because, again, as a piece of King Kong media over here, so good, so good. I get it. It's a great episode. Great King Kong story. So many great emotional beats. Had a really nice plot. A nice character arc for Kong. It was a really well-structured, well-paced episode that had a lot of progression, emotion, heart. But it just didn't fit with the MonsterVerse over here. The MonsterVerse over here, it just that they don't fit together very well at all. So I don't want to say I agree with that comment. That one comment that casts the shadow over this whole show for me. I don't want to say I agree with it. I don't feel the way about this show that I feel about Godzilla Awakening. Godzilla Awakening, I'd say, is more like 10 steps removed from Godzilla 2014, and especially from the rest of the MonsterVerse. Wow, that comic has so little to do with the MonsterVerse and creates so many logistical errors. This doesn't. It just doesn't fit nicely. You can force them together and we can pretend that they work, which is what we'll do. But in reality, we forced two pieces together that shouldn't fit together. That's how I feel about this episode. It was a great episode. It really was great. It just wasn't the MonsterVerse enough. The thing that frustrates me so much is that for me, the issues are so simple to fix. Number one, set this before Kong Skull Island so that Kong's character arc makes more sense, why he winds up sad and mopey in Kong Skull Island, why he winds up more reserved in that movie, why he doesn't interact with the natives as much. It also makes sense why he's more mature in that movie, why he is more defensive in that movie, why he's more aggressive in that movie. Number two, strike out most of the dialogue, if not all of the dialogue. Just have Kong not understand her. You could have all of the same dialogue and just Kong doesn't understand her. He only understands her gestures. That's a super easy fix. And number three, take Kong back like 1 or 2 steps. Get rid of some of the human emotion that he shows. Make him a bit more mythical and mystical. 3 simple things that they could have done to save this episode. It's not a bad episode, but it was disappointing that it was held back by such simple things is what disappointed me. I hope the finale portrays the Kong of the MonsterVerse a little more than the Kong of this episode. I'm sorry that I don't share the enthusiasm in the portrayal of Kong in this as much as a lot of people do. Personally, my peak Kong is still Kong from Godzilla vs. Kong, then not barely under him is Kong from Kong Skull Island, and then just a little under that is King Kong 2005. That's my rankings of Kong characterizations. This falls more in the middle lower end. Probably this falls around the 76 Kong, somewhere in that category of the middle tiers. They all get kind of jumbled up. I don't really have my Kong characterizations ranked past the top 3, but they all get jumbled up somewhere in there. He would be somewhere in there. I think he's good. I just think he was out of place. We're going to be doing my review for Skull Island Season 1, Episode 8. This is the Season 1 finale. You'll never catch a monkey that way. Well, they did. We are here to finish off our reviews for Skull Island Season 1. Much like with the last episode, I just have a lot of thoughts on this one, and I really think this episode reins it back in. I think this is a much stronger episode than the last episode, which I know is not the popular opinion. I really enjoyed this episode. I had a great time with it. Alright, jumping into it. I always enjoy when an episode picks up the second where the last one left off, so that's a good place to start. I appreciate the plot reference as to why we saw the art and why there was such an emphasis on it in the previous episode when Charlie was stuck in Kong's temple. There's an explanation here as well as to why the Kraken is such a dick, throwing whales on land, not going on land, and I appreciated the fact that they gave us an explanation, and basically the Kraken is just, it knows that if it's on land it won't be able to beat Kong in a fight, so it's trying to bait Kong into the sea because, well, MonsterVerse Titans will titan and they both want the title of king, it seems. I'm sad that they sidelined Mike in this episode. He was one of our main characters through so much of the show, and then it seems like 2 episodes ago the show kind of forgot what we were doing. It suddenly became the Annie and Irene show when originally it started out as the Cap and Mike and Charlie show. At some point that shifts to becoming the Annie Irene show. Fine, fair enough. I really like Irene. I'm still not an Annie fan. The full season binge really helped my appreciation of the character Annie. But it's sad to see that basically who was our main character for the first couple episodes of the show has been sidelined and reduced to basically sitting in a bed for the last couple. I do like the way that Charlie balances his true feelings with humor. I like the way that he sometimes drops the humor and you can see that he has genuine concern. On the other end of that spectrum, Annie often is a humorous character, often in this episode as well, and I feel like she compromises the dark tone of this episode. I also did not like that little joke where they're like, dog doesn't talk. We know. I didn't think that joke worked at all. I didn't like that whole scene because it's like they know dog swam here. How else did they think dog got here? What, they think dog rode a boat here? Isn't it common knowledge that he can swim? And this also doesn't play into the rest of the episode. Like, they say that almost like it's gonna be this reveal where it's like, dog's gonna swim us off the island. No, he won't. That's just not relevant. Nice squid arm in the intro. I like that stuff. That's good stuff. I like the way that they always switched out the intro title card. I love how they build up the new camp upon the wreckage of the 1973 expedition. This seems to just be one of the nameless helicopters, like the one that landed on the Buffalo in Kong Skull Island, where we don't really know who was in it or what it was about. It kind of reminded me of like how Chapman was super stranded all by himself, but I wish the helicopter itself had more overgrowth on it. But I loved seeing it. I love that kind of visual connection to that movie. That's the kind of stuff this show needed more of. The humor here when Mike is told to shut up and that nobody wants to hear him talk does not land at all for me. That whole scene I thought could have been omitted from the episode and we would have just saved time. I didn't think it worked at all. I thought it was awkward. Not for me, I guess. Good to have the confirmation that Annie's 16, almost 17. That's a good age confirmation for her to have, and very convenient that she happens to be Charlie's age. I do like the way that Irene bonds with Annie here, but Annie follows it up by giving one of the cringiest lines I've heard, probably the worst line in the Monsterverse, maybe right next to the gonorrhea line from King of the Monsters, and that is, "I am the giant monster." Ugh, that was rough. That was a stupid line. When I watched that with my little brother, the very first thing he said when she said that, he just turns to me and goes, "Bad line." Yeah, that was rough. I showed it to my older brother, but in the trailer version of it, and he went, "Ooh." Like, everybody knew that line was bad. Okay, good Charles callback. She calls him Charles like in the second episode, but why? I don't get it. Why did she switch all of a sudden? Also, I like that they call her Anne here, just as a reference to that character from the King Kong mythology, the End Arrow character. It's nice to have some resolution to Cap and Charlie's story here, and I love their relationship. I love the two of them. I think Cap is such a great dad. Flares are being brought back into the Monsterverse. They are a reoccurring motif in the Monsterverse, appearing in most entries. That awkward hold on to me scene doesn't really work for me. It's a little too horny for these characters. I know they're almost adults, but it was just awkward, I thought. I love the human moment here where Irene goes and cries with Sam. That's probably one of my favorite moments in the entire episode. Might be my favorite human scene in the episode. I thought it was great. A really, really great, touching moment that you don't see in most media. It's weird how they treat crossing the bridge here as a scary thing, because you'd think Charlie and Dog would have had to cross that bridge in the previous episode in order to get back on land, so I'm not sure why it was all of a sudden scary. What is down there in that pit? We can only make out fog and a couple plants, but it seems that Annie is aware of pits like that on Annie's island, so maybe that's not something completely foreign to her. She says going down into the pit makes you sick, and I think maybe she means that the fog makes you sick, or that the monsters down there will kill you or something. My little brother theorized that it's a portal to the Hollow Earth. I don't think so, just because that'd be a pretty big cavern to lead to the Hollow Earth. I think it's probably more than likely going to be explored in season 2, and it may be just like a way to enter the hollow pockets under Skull Island or something. I don't know what kind of creature could live down there that makes you sick and might produce the fog itself, but it seems like Kong's unaware of it. It also kind of reminded me of the pit from the 1933 film and the 2005 film where all the bugs live. Annie is a little tonally inconsistent in this episode and in her characterization here. She goes from being hyped to "my dad's dead" and she's all serious all of a sudden, and then she's hyped again in the very next scene. I thought that was an awkward moment. I love the way Kong shows up here in this episode. He shows up just to observe them. He is an amazing king, and this is the kind of characterization that makes him my favorite Titan. I mean, this is great stuff. This characterization is the best he has in the entire show. This is my favorite Kong episode in the show. This is how he should have been treated in the last episode, as a monster who you can still see some humanity in, rather than the other way around. And that's where the last episode went wrong. This episode does it right. I really loved Kong in this episode. This felt like the Kong from the Monsterverse. This felt like the Kong from Godzilla vs. Kong. That is what I wanted. Also, it's really cute the way that Dog jumps away from Kong in fear when Kong shows up. I like that moment. And then Kong's glowing eyes return here. They glow like they did in the Kong Skull Island movie, and they glow brighter than ever. That's such a cool thing. I hope they do it in Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. The necklace has changed positions since the last time we saw it. I don't know how that really happened. Kong does another ground pound here when he gets angry, much like in Godzilla vs. Kong, and he's done that a couple times in this show. And then he does the poster roar. He does that roar that I thought looked so weird on that poster, but it looks good in the context of the episode. I love the way that Kong can clearly stop them at any time he wants. He really could just smush them if he really so chose, but he chooses not to. I mean, he's not trying to kill people that don't deserve it. He's just wondering why they stole his thing. The CGI chase here is very weird. You've got CGI environments and then hand-drawn elements in a very Godzilla Singular Point-esque way, except the animation here just does not support that the way that Singular Point did. I think it looks pretty rough. Okay, that bridge that they crossed, it just should have been a log, a very classic King Kong reference. I don't get why it had to be a bridge bridge, maybe just so that Kong could fling it, but he could have broken the log and you could have gotten the same effect anyways. I do like that you can see Dog's claws stick into the stone in this episode. That was something I was saying I wanted in the previous episode where he climbed a wall. Kong does a big Godzilla versus Kong pose when he jumps. That's fun. I like the sacrifice here that Charlie makes. It's pretty heroic. It ultimately, I don't really know if it helped all that much, but he believes it does, and that's what matters. I wish Kong would run on two legs again. This is just a MonsterVerse thing overall. They do it in Godzilla vs. Kong as well, and I think it's a big misstep. Kong running on two legs is one of the things that made him feel so special in Kong Skull Island. Just in terms of this show, they need more variation in the sound effects for how Kong runs and for his footsteps, because it just sounded like they're spamming the same sound effect over and over again. It was very distracting. Not very good sound design. The tracker in Annie's handcuff is most definitely how they find her at the end of the episode when she's stuck under the ocean. That's a good little detail that is very subtle and maybe hard to pick up on, so I like that that was in here. Again, just as a little reminder so that it's not a question we have at the end of the episode. The group's reaction to Kong is wonderful. It really builds up the majesty of him and reminds me of the Kong Skull Island movie and the way he was treated back then. We also get a fun callback here with the crabs on the beach. That's a really nice way to tie the whole series full circle. There's a lot of stuff in this episode that ties the series full circle in a really wonderful way. I love the way Kong interacts with the water in this episode and how he has real weight and what he does in the water really matters. I also like how he refrains from killing Annie and Dog here. I wonder if he was truthfully about to. I don't think he was going to. I think he was going to do another big ground pound right next to them to give them one final warning. I'm surprised Kong was taken off guard by the sea monster and wasn't prepared to fight it when he landed on the beach. You'd think he'd be like, well, I'm on the beach and this thing just threw a whale at me last night, so it's go time. I actually think it would have been more interesting if Kong was apprehensive to follow her onto the beach but did it skeptically because he knew that that thing might attack him. This fight is super brutal and dynamic and exciting. I really love it. This is the best fight in the whole show. I always love seeing damage on characters while they're fighting. It's great to see it on Kong. I love the way that Kong gets beaten up here. It reminds me of Rick Grimes, one of my favorite characters who gets beaten up all the time. And the electric powers, which the Kraken apparently just possesses, I really thought it was just picking up the electricity on the boat and then weaponizing it, but apparently it can do it whenever it wants. It gives Kong great battle damage in this episode. The Kraken's design is also very Lovecraftian and, in my opinion, pretty stupid looking. This is probably the dumbest looking Titan in the MonsterVerse, but I get it. It's a nice Lovecraftian Cthulhu-esque design. I like the big crab hands. Those are fun. It's got good sea monster traits. It just kind of looked like a dork. Like it looked like a nerd that, of course, Kong was going to be able to beat it up. I love the way that Kong tears the tendrils apart and the way that it kind of seems like it regenerates them. Why doesn't Annie run away sooner? You'd think she'd be booking it the second this fight started. Also, rip to Kong's necklace. I really have no idea how it could possibly show back up after it gets washed away by a big wave. I'm a real big fan of the waves in this fight overall and the weight of this battle. I mean, it truthfully feels like this battle matters and it is causing repercussions for everybody. Bad camera angles here when Irene wants to help. What were those shot choices? Super weird. Also, I do like the plot thread. It's a good teaser here, having Sam mention that he's been through this before. That's a great setup. Maybe that's how Irene learned about the Hollow Earth, a previous monster encounter between these two where he lost a son or a daughter of his own. The waves raining down upon Cap in the woods reminds me of the wave crossing the air traffic controller's feet in Godzilla 2014, just showing the true consequences of these enormous creatures' actions. Good centipede attack here, very King Kong 2005, and a great heroic moment for Mike to save Cap in this episode, kind of paying back the way that he wasn't able to save his own father. Now he can save Charlie's. He shoots the flare into the centipede's eye, much like what they do to the Skullcrawler in Kong Skull Island, but that also winds up stranding them with no way to contact the others. They are now lost in the woods as a result of it. I like the consequences of that action. I love when Kong's face goes crazy mode in this show. He does it all the time, and it's super fun to see him get angry and fun to see him utilize weapons. But I do feel like his choice of weapon in this episode being the rock critters, it was a little out of character for him. I don't think Kong would be the kind of guy to do that to an innocent creature. Although it was awesome to see how that thing got sliced and diced. That is where the anime influence of this show shines through in full force. This is such a subtle little touch, but having Charlie cough when he gets caught and his head gets banged on the tree was a fantastic touch and a great human element into this show. I also love seeing the proper iwi designs. I do believe these are the iwi. Great design. I love the way they move. I love the way they act. The only thing I wish is just that they didn't talk. Even my little brother was genuinely disappointed to hear them talk. It just deflates all the tension in the scene and it makes them kind of boring, and it also raises some questions. I guess they needed to do it so that the characters could learn Kong's name, but you could have probably just had the name scrawled on text on the temple or something. That'd be a little cheesy, because why would it be written in English? But I don't know. There's other ways to deliver Kong's name. Hell, the guy who tells them about the island, the guy in episode 2, that GI, he could have warned them about a creature called Kong, or there could be a legend about a creature called Kong, and they could just put 2 and 2 together the way that they do in every other King Kong movie ever. I just wish they didn't talk. Maybe it's just that the Iwi who talks here sounds like Kong's native friend from the other episode, and so it's a little distracting. It just wasn't the right voice to pick, in my opinion. And like I said, it does raise questions. Maybe the blue patches mean that these aren't the Iwi we know from the Kong Skull Island movie. Maybe this truthfully is another tribe of Iwi. If that's the case, why do they know English? The only people who should know English are the Iwi that Hank Marlowe interacted with for all those years and taught English to. We learned that in Skull Island, The Birth of Kong, very select Iwi have learned how to speak English, and they don't really use English often. They don't really like to speak English. I thought it was weird in Skull Island, The Birth of Kong, that the Iwi spoke, and I think it's weird here. I think it's more distracting here that we can hear the voice rather than just read it and transplant our own voice onto it, but it just didn't work for me. The Kraken drags Kong down under the water like Godzilla does. That's a good little touch. And while there is a lot of blood going on here and Kong appears injured, this scene lacks stakes. It lacks the stakes of the Godzilla vs. Kong fight in the ocean because Kong feels like he can just hold his breath forever. He is not struggling as much in this fight as he needs to be. Kong's arm also stretches way too much here. He's Reed Richards all of a sudden, but it is fun to see him use the maritime as a weapon. That's a great callback to the first episode, pays things off full circle in a really satisfying way. Very Kong Skull Island of him to utilize a boat as a weapon, or a piece of a boat as a weapon, I should say. But how did it sink so close to the island? I mean, did that thing just drift close to the island, or was the storm that close to the island? It just, that was a question mark for me. It was like, how did that get so close? I was under the impression that they went down in the giant storm unit that surrounded Skull Island, rather than just right off the shore of it, where Mike and Charlie should have still been in a storm when they landed on the island if that was the case, and everybody kind of should have landed on the same beach. I was curious about why that wound up there. Great damage here on both ends. Love the way that Kong smashes that thing into the Kraken's eye, and I love the way that the Kraken glows underwater. It makes him really exciting to see down there, and also provides a source of lighting for them. I love the battle damage overall in this episode. I know I keep mentioning that, but I want to say that I honestly think they do that better than Godzilla vs. Kong, the movie where Godzilla gets the shit kicked out of him and then can just walk around with maybe a little bit of scratches on his chest, like a bit of an orange chest, and then he's got like a gash in his leg that kind of is ignored. But the guy takes an axe to the face and walks away from it like nothing happened, whereas Kong gets stomped on the ground and scratched up and then walks away from the movie with just some scratches on his chest. And it's like, where's the battle damage that these guys should be having? Show me them beaten up and bloody and bruised, and I like that this show does that constantly. Those lizard creatures in the last episode, being able to put so much battle damage on Kong kind of ruins the impact of seeing it here, so I wish they had picked one or the other rather than giving it to both, because it makes the lizard creatures seem way more important than they should be. But I like it. I love the way it looked. I also love the heroic nature of Kong here, the way that he saves Dog and Annie. I didn't need the flashback, but it was a good way to pay off his bond with the native in the last episode, and shows how much he looks out for nature and how he's just a good dude. Also, there's a little crab in that cup from episode 1. That's such a cute little detail. Round 2. All right, it's time for round 2. It is much more intense and fast paced. It is also much more on land. I love it. It mirrors Godzilla vs. Kong, although I guess a little bit reversed here, where in Godzilla vs. Kong we were sort of kind of in Kong's domain, where he was able to swing around the city no problem, and then we kind of flip it in round 2, where it's a lot more brutal and intense and close up, and Godzilla's now wiping Kong because Kong can't swing around anymore. I love in this instance how Kong flips the Kraken over his shoulder, like how the 1962 King Kong does to Godzilla. That's really cool. Kong's fighting style is faster and more aggressive here than we have ever seen or felt before. This is the prime of Kong's life that Adam Wingard was talking about, how he says in Godzilla vs. Kong, Kong is no longer in his prime. He's kind of a warrior who hasn't needed a fight in a long enough time to kind of be out of shape. And here we see that if Kong had been left unrestricted fighting monsters, not put in his little biodome, and he had worked himself up as a warrior, I think he would have beat the shit out of Godzilla. I mean, I think Godzilla still would have probably won because he's got plot armor and durability up the butt, but I think Kong would have put a smackdown on Godzilla that he truthfully would never have forgotten. The fast hands were amazing. I wish that wasn't spoiled for me, but it was amazing to see. I loved it. I do wish there was a little more emotional weight in Kong's eyes and a bit more of an emotional performance given to Kong in this episode. I know it's a cartoon, so that's a hard thing to do, but you can try. I can think of plenty of cartoons that have some really, really impactful character moments with zero dialogue, and I wish they had given Kong a bit of that, as he was getting vengeance on this creature for his lost friend and for his entire lost village. This should have been a much more emotional, cathartic moment for Kong. The way the blood rains down, it reminded me of the way that Kong's blood being in the water awoke this guy in the first place. Like, it's a way to tie things back together full circle that way too. Kong is normally much more certain when he beats an enemy up before celebrating. He celebrates a little premature in this episode. I think he probably should have killed the thing and then celebrated, but then you wouldn't have had the big uh-oh, Kong messed up final moment. But he does a nice little King Kong chest beat to say, I win. He does that all the time. That's his thing. He's been doing that since 1933. And I like the way that the sky in the background kind of creates this glowing halo behind him. Like he's God. How did that necklace show back up? That's the most unrealistic part of this whole show. That thing got washed away and lost forever. What? I wonder if Annie still has it. She was hanging on to it when she cracked her head on the rock, so maybe she still has it. I love the black eye here. When Kong gets smacked in the face and gets a black eye, it's an eye for an eye the way that he took the Kraken's eye. Reminds me of when Godzilla gets a black eye, and, well, he does it twice, I guess, now that I think of it. One time Kumonga gives it to him, and one time Hedorah gives it to him. But it reminded me of that. I also love the way that Kong tears this guy in half. Just another classic MonsterVerse brutal finisher. Not as brutal as the stuff we've seen in the other movies, but that's probably just because this is a cartoon. If it was live action, that could have, I could see, been one of the most brutal we see. It also just shows Kong's bare strength, that he's able to pick up a titan much larger than he is and tear it in half with his bare hands. I also love that Kong causes a tsunami when he throws the Kraken. I wish he threw it a little further. I think it looked like it was going to go on land, but it's understandable that they did it the way they did it so that there could be some true consequences for his size and actions. By causing a tsunami, it also parallels the 2014 Godzilla movie when Godzilla does the same. And he cracks her head on a rock and gets knocked out. It kind of cuts the whole episode abrupt. Like, it was a very abrupt way to end it. And honestly, it was a little jarring for me in a way that I don't think it was intended to be. I get that it was supposed to be jarring. We're supposed to be like, whoa, we are so disoriented just like she is. But it didn't feel natural for me as a viewer. It felt more like they went, oh, shoot. So we've got, how much time do we have left to finish this episode? 2 minutes? We only have 2 minutes plus credits. Okay. She gets knocked out and then that's done, right? That works? Awesome. That's how it felt to me. Also, just for the sake of doing the D-Man thing, she gets her head knocked on a rock under the water and passes out the same way that Kong did and King Kong lives. It's an Easter egg. So Annie wakes up in what I'm assuming to be New York based on what I think is the Empire State Building, except if it is, it's looking quite chunky. Lose some weight, Empire State. Good King Kong vibes if it is New York. It's a nice way to tie back into the franchise and where this all started. 2 weeks have passed. So I don't know if Irene's planning another expedition back to the island. I have a feeling that's going to be the plot of season 2. I would really worry that there's going to be this forced conflict where Irene's like, well, I got you back and that's all I wanted. And everybody else on that island, well, they can figure out their own way out. And then Annie's the one who's like, I want to go back for my dog. And I don't give a shit about people because I'm Annie. And then and then they go back for the dog. And of course, the other people. I would prefer if season 2 was Irene being like, I want you to stay. I am going back. You're not coming. And that's the conflict. That'd be a nice conflict between the two of them. But 2 weeks have passed, which means they need to hurry. Because Aaron takes off in like a year or so. Aaron Brooks is going to be headed to Skull Island soon enough, which also makes me wonder if these guys were stranded on Skull Island and met the Iwi, why didn't the Iwi mention that they had other visitors just recently when Aaron shows up and say, hey, just a few years ago we had a different group of people show up. Unless again, this is a different tribe, which then again raises the question, how did they learn English? I like the ambiguity of who made it off the island and who didn't. It seems to imply that only Annie and Irene made it off. I support this idea. I think this is a great idea for the writers because it sets things up very interestingly for season 2. You could have a lot of really interesting pairings in season 2 as a result of this. There are many unanswered questions in the show, such as what's down in the pit, what's up with the Iwi, is Kong okay? The guy got flooded last time we saw him. What are the consequences of this big Kraken battle gonna be? How do we set things up for the future of the MonsterVerse? Why did Irene know about the Hollow Earth and the Titans? Is Cap ever gonna find that eel monster that's apparently not Godzilla for legal reasons, and then they're gonna make it a new monster as a result of that? And who's gonna make it off the island and that kind of stuff? I don't love leaving with so many unanswered questions. I get it. It sets things up for a season 2, and I would be all in support of that if we knew we were getting a season 2, but we might not. With all the writers' strikes, with all of the actors' strikes, with all of the way that Hollywood is crumbling around us, with the way that streaming is being gunned for, and with the way that there was never a confirmation of a season 2 in the first place, at best it sounds like we have like maybe a 70% chance of getting a season 2. That makes me just really nervous that they are gonna put themselves in a position where we're not gonna get a season 2 and we're gonna be left with all these unanswered questions, and then I guess we can just all just go, well, they all made it off the island. Actually Irene saved everybody. Just wrapped up real quick. I don't know. That makes me nervous not having a season 2 confirmed. That's why I gotta talk about it, and that's why you gotta talk about it, and that's why we all gotta keep talking about it, because I want to know what happens next. Also, no Monarch in this whole show, and apparently there won't be in the season 2 either. So this is the first MonsterVerse entry with no Monarch, which kind of undoes the premise of the MonsterVerse, which was that the interconnected web was going to be the Monarch organization, but it's fine, I guess. It wasn't important for this story. I think Monarch would have probably found out about it and been like, so people went to that island, let's intervene. But I guess not. We know that they really can't in canon, so I guess kudos to them for sticking to continuity. But there you go, no Monarch. All right, overall, I actually really liked this episode. I don't know if it sounded like I was complaining a lot. I had a great time with it. I really loved it. I loved the action. I loved the characterization of Kong. Honestly, in retrospect on the show, and I'll talk about this when I do a season review, the last episode is the one that I have big issues with. Other than that, this show really works for me. I was a big fan of this episode. I liked the music. I thought it was really nicely done. I thought the music really kicked in this episode. I thought that was fun. It just goes to show that King Kong has never had a bad soundtrack to date, and I like his theme. I like Kong's theme music in this show. I liked the choreography of it. I liked the consequences and the weight and the battle damage, the stuff that I've talked about through the whole video. I liked the human emotion. I thought the human element was lacking in this episode, but I did like the emotional beats that they spent time on. And overall, I was pretty satisfied with it. I thought it was a pretty good finale. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know down below. Did you guys like this one? I thought it was great. One of my favorite episodes of the season for sure. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed that one. Let me know what you guys thought about the Skull Island anime down below. I actually had a pretty good time with it. I liked the show quite a bit. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you very much, guys. The support I get on the Patreon really helps me directly and helps to make sure I can keep making videos like this for you guys. If you want to support the Patreon, you can use the link in the description down below, where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. All right, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time for the next one. D-Man, out.